Chapter 1: The Hum of Decay. The tremor was subtle, a faint vibration thrumming through the composite floor of biocontainment wing Gamma. Lyra Chen, hunched over a nutrient-film tray cultivating extremophile-resistant mosses, paused her meticulous work. Her pipette hovered. The gentle hum of the environmental controls, a constant companion in Tartarus, seemed to stutter, the pitch infinitesimally altered. A flicker of the overhead lumen strips painted her workspace in a momentary, sickly yellow, before returning to their standard sterile white. She straightened, pushing a stray strand of dark hair from her brow. Her lab coat, a size too large, bunched at her shoulders. "Wrench, you messing with the power grid again," she called out, her voice carrying over the whir of centrifuges in the adjacent lab. No response. Jonah Ryle, wrench to everyone below level 3, usually offered a sardonic quip about the facility's aging infrastructure. Silence from engineering was unusual. Another tremor, stronger this time, rattled the delicate glassware on her bench. A petri dish skittered, teetering close to the edge. Lyra lunged, securing it. Her heart gave a small, unwelcome thump. The intercom crackled, a burst of static, then a strained voice she barely recognized as Dr. Alastair Finch from Xenomycology. "Containment breach. Sector Delta 7. Immediate lockdown procedures. Repeat, immediate lockdown." The transmission dissolved into a high-pitched squeal, then cut out abruptly. Lyra's breath caught. Delta 7 housed the primary extremophile culture vats, the primordials, as some of the senior staff called them. Things cultivated from geothermal vents so deep, so alien, they defied easy categorization. Things best left undisturbed. Heavy metal shutters, unseen until this moment, slammed down over the corridor viewport with a deafening clang, sealing Gamma wing from the main concourse. Red emergency strobes pulsed, casting dancing, demonic shadows across the lab. The airlock door to her section hissed, its indicator lights flashing amber, compromised. "No," Lyra whispered, "this was not a drill. Drills were announced orderly. This was raw, unscripted." Her datapad, lying on the bench, suddenly illuminated. A single, corrupted file icon pulsed on its screen. Vale Echo FRGMNT01 DAT. Dr. Kyron Vale, head of Project Sanctuary, the Deep-Level Safe Zone Initiative. Vale, who had died 3 months prior in a supposed pressure suit malfunction. Lyra had inherited some of his unclassified botanical data after his passing, mundane notes on subterranean flora. She'd never seen this file before. Her finger hesitated over the icon. A metallic screech echoed from the corridor beyond her lab's sealed door, followed by a wet, tearing sound. Something heavy thudded against the reinforced plaz steel. Lyra flinched. The airlock indicator beside her door turned a solid, ominous red. Sealed, or breached. She grabbed the datapad. Her moss cultures, her research, years of work forgotten. Survival asserted its primal claim. The emergency toolkit under her bench. A heavy-duty flashlight, a multi-tool nutrient bars, a water purification straw. Standard issue, never expected to be used. Another thud against the door, harder. The plaz steel groaned. Fine cracks like spiderwebs appeared near the frame. The datapad in her hand vibrated. The Vale Echo frgmnt01 dat icon pulsed faster. "Okay, Lyra," she muttered, her voice tight. "Time to move." She scanned the lab. The service hatch in the floor leading to the maintenance conduits was her only option. It was cramped, filthy, but it led away from the main corridors, away from whatever was trying to break through her door. The door buckled inward with a shriek of tortured metal. A dark, glistening tendril, thick as her arm and tipped with needle-sharp cilia, whipped through the opening. It tasted the air, retracting slightly before lunging again. Lyra scrambled towards the hatch, yanking at the recessed handle. It was stiff, rarely used. The tendril probed further into the lab, thrashing, knocking equipment from benches. Glass shattered. The air filled with a cloying, metallic scent. With a grunt, she wrenched the hatch open. A dark, narrow space gaped below. She dropped the toolkit in, then the datapad, before swinging her legs over the edge. The tendril sensed her movement, its tip swiveling. It elongated, stretching across the lab floor with unnatural speed. Lyra dropped into the conduit just as the ciliated tip slapped against the floor where she had stood moments before. She pulled the hatch closed above her, plunging herself into near-total darkness. The thuds and screeches from her lab were muffled now, but the vibrations still traveled through the metal around her. She fumbled for the flashlight, her hands shaking. The beam cut a weak swathe through the oppressive black. Dust motes danced. Pipes, thick with grime and condensation, lined the narrow tunnel. It smelled of rust and something else, something faintly organic and unwell. The datapad, clutched in her other hand, pulsed again. She risked a glance. The file icon remained. Dr. Vale, the safe zone. Was it a warning, a clue? A distant, guttural roar reverberated through the conduit system, deeper and more resonant than the sounds from her lab. It was followed by a cacophony of screams, human screams. They were cut off, one by one. The safe zone. Rumors of its existence had circulated for years. A myth, some called it, an Omnicorp boondoggle, Project Sanctuary. Level 9, they said. Self-sufficient, shielded. The only place truly secure if Tartarus ever went critical. If it was real, it was her only hope. But first, she had to survive the journey through the guts of a dying facility. And whatever Vale's echo was trying to tell her, she had a feeling it wasn't going to make the path any easier. The hum of decay was no longer subtle. It was the facility's death rattle. Chapter 2: Whispers in the Dark. The conduit was a tight squeeze, forcing Lyra to crawl on her hands and knees. The flashlight beam, her only comfort, illuminated a claustrophobic world of sweating pipes and rusted grating. Every scrape of her boots, every hitched breath, sounded deafening in the narrow space. She moved with a desperate urgency, pushing deeper into the labyrinth beneath Gamma Wing. After what felt like an eternity, she reached a junction. 3 tunnels diverged. No labels, no schematics down here. She shone the flashlight down each one. They all looked the same. Dark, forbidding, reeking of stale air and that underlying, unsettling organic scent. Her datapad pulsed again. She balanced the flashlight on a pipe and activated the screen. The Vale Echo frgmnt01 DAT file. She tapped it. The screen flickered. A string of corrupted code scrolled past, then a single, clear image, a partial schematic heavily pixelated. It showed a section of conduits, a junction much like this one. One tunnel was highlighted in a faint green. Superimposed over it, tiny and almost illegible, were the words, "Avoid primary nexus, conduit integrity compromised, alternate route, SZ access, as the safe zone." Lyra compared the crude schematic to the junction before her. The green-lit tunnel corresponded to the one on her left. Avoid primary nexus. What did that mean? She tried to access more of the file, but it reverted to the pulsing icon. A fragment, that's all it was. A slithering sound from the tunnel to her right sent a chill down her spine. It was close, too close. She made her choice, left. The new conduit was even tighter. Condensation dripped onto her, cold and greasy. She could hear movement behind her now, a wet dragging, punctuated by soft clicks. It was following her, or hunting. Her muscles burned. Her knees were raw. The air grew heavier, thicker. She pushed onward, driven by the image on the datapad and the sounds at her heels. Suddenly, the floor of the conduit dropped away. She yelped, flailing, managing to grab hold of a rusted pipe just as her legs dangled into a wider, vertical shaft. The flashlight clattered from her grasp, tumbling into the darkness below, its beam cartwheeling wildly before extinguishing with a faint crack. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her, darkness absolute. The slithering sound was closer, directly above her in the conduit she'd just exited. "No, no, no," she panted, her fingers slipping on the slick pipe. She kicked out, searching for purchase. Her foot hit something solid, a ladder rung recessed into the shaft wall, then another. With a surge of adrenaline, she transferred her weight, one hand at a time, to the ladder. It was old, coated in something slimy that squelched under her grip. She began to descend, slowly, carefully, into the suffocating black. Something dripped onto her head from above. Not water. It was viscous, warm. She descended faster, heedless of the uncertain rungs. Her foot missed one, and she jarred her shoulder as she caught herself. A choked sob escaped her. Then, blessedly, her feet touched solid ground. She was in a larger space, a maintenance hub of some kind. She fumbled for her backup light, a small keychain lead she always carried, its beam pathetically weak but better than nothing. It revealed a circular room, pipes and cables snaking across the walls and ceiling. Several more conduit openings punctuated the walls, and in the center of the room, huddled together, were three figures. "Hello," Lyra called out, her voice hoarse. "Is anyone there?" One of the figures stirred. A man, large and built like a bulldog, rose to his feet. He wore the gray coveralls of Tartarus security. His face, illuminated by the feeble LED, was grim. Marcus Rex Cole, head of security, known for his brusque demeanor and unyielding adherence to protocol. "Chen," Rex's voice was a low growl. "What are you doing down here? This level is restricted." The outbreak," Lyra stammered, gesturing vaguely upwards. "Gamma Wing, it's gone." Rex's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something understanding, resignation, passed through his eyes. "We heard. Communications are down facility-wide. Power is intermittent." He gestured to the other two figures who were now stirring. A young woman in a junior technician's uniform, pale and trembling, and an older man in a medical coat, clutching a dented first aid kit. Soto, Doc Ramirez. We were in sub-level 2 when the alarms hit. There are things, creatures, Lyra began. We know, Rex cut her off. We've seen them. His gaze was hard. Only one objective now, Project Sanctuary, the safe zone, level 9. Doc Ramirez, a man with kind eyes despite the grime smudging his face, spoke up. It's our only chance, Lyra. The rumors. They say it's shielded, stocked for years. The young technician, Soto, whimpered. Are we going to make it? Rex fixed her with a stare. We will if you follow my orders and keep your head. Panic is a luxury we don't have. He turned back to Lyra. You seen anything of Vale's work? Any schematics for the lower levels? Lyra hesitated. The fragment on her datapad. Avoid primary nexus. Rex was heading directly for the primary nexus. If common facility knowledge was anything to go by, the main transit shafts to the lower levels. I might have something, she said slowly, pulling out her datapad. The screen was dim, battery draining. She showed him the fragmented schematic. It was on Dr. Vale's personal files. It mentions an alternate route, says the primary access is compromised. Rex squinted at the small screen. Compromised? By what? Vale died months ago. This could be outdated. Perhaps, Lyra conceded. But the conduit I was just in. Something was following me, something big, and the sounds from above. The primary transit shafts are our fastest way down, Rex stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. They're designed for rapid evacuation, armored, more defensible than these rat tunnels. He tapped a section of the wall. This hub connects to maintenance shaft delta. It'll take us straight to the level 4 express elevators. From there, it's a direct line to 9. But if Vale's warning is current, Lyra persisted. Ifs and maybes get you killed, Chen, Rex said flatly. We stick to what we know. The main routes are designed for this. These backways are unmapped, likely unstable. He looked at the small group. Anyone got a better idea? Doc Ramirez shook his head. Soto just hugged herself tighter. Lyra felt a knot of unease. Rex's logic was sound from a tactical perspective. But Vale's message, however fragmented, felt like a direct warning. And the insistent pulsing of that file icon. A low, chittering sound echoed from one of the conduit openings, the one Lyra had not come through. It was a chorus, not a single entity, growing louder. Rex pulled a heavy-duty stun baton from his belt. Its tip crackled with blue energy. Looks like the scenic route is off the table anyway. We move, now. He pointed towards a heavy steel door marked Maintenance Shaft Delta Access. Soto, Ramirez, you're with me. Chen, bring up the rear, and try to keep that light steady. Lyra swallowed. The chittering was closer. She had no weapon, only her wits and a cryptic message from a dead man. As Rex wrestled with the wheel lock on the heavy door, she glanced at her datapad again. The Valeco icon pulsed, almost frantically. Then, for a split second, new text flickered beneath it, too fast to read fully, but she caught two words. Spores. Listen. Spores, listen. What did that mean? The door to maintenance shaft Delta groaned open with a rush of stale, cold air. Rex stepped through, baton held ready. Doc Ramirez and Soto followed, casting fearful glances behind them. Lyra took one last look at the conduit opening where the chittering intensified. Then, with a deep breath, she followed Rex into the darkness of the main shaft, the dead man's words echoing in her mind. Chapter 3: Red Lights and Rusted Promises. Maintenance shaft Delta was a chasm of concrete and steel, plunging into Tartarus's depths. A narrow catwalk, slick with an oily film, clung to one wall, spiraling downwards. Emergency lights, spaced far apart, cast pools of bloody crimson light, leaving vast stretches in disorienting shadow. The air was cold, carrying the metallic tang of ozone and something else, a faint, sweetish odor that Lyra found deeply unsettling. Rex moved with grim efficiency, his heavy boots clanging on the grated catwalk. Soto stumbled behind him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Doc Ramirez, though older, kept a steady pace, his eyes scanning the oppressive darkness above and below. Lyra brought up the rear, her small LED beam doing little to pierce the gloom beyond the immediate vicinity of her feet. "Stay alert," Rex barked, his voice echoing unnaturally in the vast space. "Anything moves, you shout." They descended in silence for a time, the only sounds their footsteps and the drip, drip, drip of unseen condensation. Lyra's datapad, tucked into her lab coat pocket, felt heavy. Spores. Listen. The words looped in her thoughts. She strained her ears, trying to filter out the ambient facility noises, listening for what? Whispers. Strange frequencies. The Swedish odor grew stronger. Lyra sniffed the air. It reminded her of overripe fruit, but with an undercurrent of something chemical, something artificial. Soto suddenly cried out, pointing a trembling finger. "Look up there!" High above, silhouetted against a distant red emergency light, something clung to the ceiling of the shaft. It was large, bulbous, like a grotesque parody of a hornet's nest, but pulsing with a faint, internal luminescence. As they watched, a section of it seemed to detach, drifting downwards like a dark, silent snowflake. Then another and another. "Spores," Lyra breathed, the realization hitting her with cold certainty. "Keep moving," Rex ordered, his voice tight. He didn't look up. "Don't breathe too deep." Easier said than done. The air was thick with them now, countless dark motes swirling in the crimson light, too numerous to avoid. Lyra tried to cover her mouth and nose with her sleeve, but it felt futile. She could feel them, light as dust, settling on her skin, her hair. A strangled cough came from Soto. She clutched her throat. "Can't breathe." "Panic later, Soto," Doc Ramirez said, his voice strained but firm. He put a hand on her shoulder. "Small, shallow breaths. We need to get out of this shaft." The catwalk vibrated. A low scraping sound came from below, echoing up the shaft. Rex halted, holding up a hand. "Hold." They listened, frozen. The scraping grew louder, closer. It was accompanied by a series of wet, rhythmic clicks. "What is that?" Soda whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Rex peered over the railing into the abyss. "Can't see. Whatever it is, it's climbing." He looked down the spiraling catwalk. "Elevator access should be another 20 meters down. Move." They hurried onwards, the sense of pursuit adding a new layer of dread. The spores continued their silent descent, coating everything. Lyra imagined them clogging her lungs, taking root. She glanced at her datapad. No new messages from Vale, just the insistent, silent pulse of the icon. A section of the catwalk ahead was buckled, twisted upwards at a dangerous angle. A gaping hole showed the dizzying drop below. "Damn it," Rex swore. "Structural failure, we'll have to climb around it." The damaged section was narrow, the handrail on the shaft side gone. Only a few centimeters of buckled grating offered a precarious path. One slip meant a fatal plunge. Rex went first, pressing himself flat against the shaft wall, moving with slow, deliberate care. He made it across. "Ramirez, you next." Doc Ramirez took a deep breath, his knuckles white where he gripped his medical kit. He edged onto the buckled grating. Halfway across, his foot slipped. He cried out, windmilling his arms. Rex lunged, grabbing his wrist, hauling him to safety. The medical kit clattered from Ramirez's grasp, tumbling into the darkness with a series of metallic bangs. "Kit's gone," Ramirez panted, shaken but unharmed. "Soto, your turn, nice and easy." Soto was paralyzed, staring at the gap. I can't do it." "You don't have a choice, kid," Rex said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "The alternative is whatever's climbing up this shaft." The scraping from below was very close now. A guttural clicking accompanied it, like giant mandibles snapping. Lyra stepped forward. "Soto, look at me." She kept her voice calm, even. "I'll go first. You follow right behind me. Watch where I put my feet. Don't look down." Soto nodded numbly, tears streaming down her face. Lyra took a steadying breath, trying to ignore the acrid taste of the spores in her mouth. She edged onto the damaged section, her fingers searching for purchase on the cold, slick wall. The grating groaned under her weight. She focused on her feet, on the small patch of rusted metal directly in front of her. One step, another. The abyss yawned to her right. She made it, heart pounding. "Your turn, Soto. You can do this." Soto, spurred by a fresh wave of horrific clicks from below, forced herself onto the narrow walkway. She moved like an automaton, her eyes fixed on Lyra. She was almost across when a section of the grating she was on gave way with a terrifying screech of tearing metal. Soto screamed, her legs dangling. Lyra and Rex grabbed her arms, pulling with all their strength. For a heart-stopping moment, she hung suspended, the creatures below audibly closer. Then, with a combined heave, they hauled her onto the relative safety of the intact catwalk. Soto collapsed, sobbing. "No time," Rex grunted, already moving. "Elevator access there." A heavy steel door, identical to the one they'd entered the shaft through, was set into the wall. A faded sign read, "Level 4 Transit Elevator E17." But the call button was dark, the status indicator unlit. Rex slammed his fist against it. Useless. He scanned the door. Manual override somewhere. A deafening screech echoed from just below their position on the catwalk. A colossal, chitinous leg, barbed and insectal, slammed onto the grating a mere 10 feet away, crushing the metal. It was followed by another, then a monstrous, segmented body, heaving itself up from the depths. Its head, a nightmare of multifaceted eyes and dripping mandibles, swiveled towards them. "Move!" Lyra screamed, pushing Soto towards the door. Doc Ramirez found it first, a recessed lever near the door frame caked in grime. Emergency release. He threw his weight against it. With a groan of protesting gears, the elevator door shuddered, then slid open an inch. 2 inches. The creature lunged, its speed belying its bulk. Rex fired his stun baton. The blue energy crackled against its carapace, making it hiss and recoil momentarily, but doing no apparent damage. "Get in," Rex yelled, positioning himself between them and the monster. Lyra shoved Soto through the narrow opening. Doc Ramirez squeezed in after her. The creature advanced again, one of its forelimbs sweeping across the catwalk, narrowly missing Rex. Lyra hesitated at the door. "Rex." "Go get them to the safe zone," Rex roared, dodging another strike. He landed a blow with the baton on one of its eyes. The creature shrieked, a sound that vibrated Lyra's bones. The elevator door was agonizingly slow. Lyra slipped through, then turned to help pull Rex. He dived through the shrinking gap just as a massive claw slammed against the exterior of the door, denting the pla's steel. The door sealed with a pneumatic hiss. They were plunged into the pitch-black interior of the elevator car. For a moment, no one spoke, their ragged breathing the only sound. Then the car lurched, dropping a few feet with a sickening thud before stabilizing. The emergency lights inside flickered on, weak and orange. Soto was curled in a ball, hyperventilating. Doc Ramirez was checking himself for injuries. Rex leaned against the wall, his chest heaving. His stun baton was gone, lost in the scuffle. "That thing," Lyra began. "What was it?" "Something from the lower menagerie, maybe," Rex rasped. "Or something new, doesn't matter, we're clear of it for now." He looked at the control panel. Most of the buttons were dark. Only Level 9, Project Sanctuary, glowed with a faint, inviting green. "Level 9, Doc Ramirez said, a note of hope in his voice. "It's still active." Rex stabbed the button. The elevator gave another lurch, then began a slow, groaning descent. The indicator lights for the levels above them flickered past. 5, 6, 7. Lyra felt a profound sense of unease. The spores. Vale's cryptic warning about listening. The almost too conveniently lit button for Level 9. Was this rescue, or were they being herded? Her datapad vibrated. She pulled it out. The screen was almost entirely dark now, the battery critical. But one new line of text glowed faintly beneath the icon, clearer this time. "They hear hope. Sanctuary is bait." Lyra's blood ran cold. Bait for what, or for whom? The elevator continued its descent, a steel coffin carrying them towards a promise that might be a lie, deeper into the heart of Tartarus. Chapter 4: The Green Glow of Deception. The elevator shuddered to a halt. The doors remained closed. The air inside the car was thick with the scent of ozone, stale sweat, and Soto's quiet, hiccuping sobs. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the failing emergency lights. "Well," Rex's voice was rough. "Level 9, open up, you damned thing." He jabbed the door open button. Nothing. He hit it again harder. The button stayed stubbornly dark. Doc Ramirez ran a hand over his tired face. Power fluctuations. Maybe the door mechanism is jammed. Lyra stared at her data pad. The chilling word sanctuary is bait seared into her vision. The battery was almost gone. The screen flickered erratically, Vale's message fading in and out. "Rex," she said, her voice low, "I don't think we should be here." Rex turned, his expression incredulous. "What are you talking about, Chen? This is it. This is Project Sanctuary, our only shot." "Vale's message," Lyra insisted, holding up the dying data pad. "It said sanctuary is bait. It said they hear hope." "A corrupted file from a dead man," Rex scoffed, though a sliver of uncertainty touched his eyes. "This facility is falling apart. Data corruption is the least of our worries. We're here. This is the destination." He hammered on the elevator door with his fist. "Open. Omnicorp security, override command." A soft chime, startlingly clear, sounded from a speaker panel above the controls. Then a voice, calm and synthesized, utterly devoid of emotion, filled the small car. "Welcome to Project Sanctuary Level 9. Biometric scan required for egress. Please place your right hand on the panel." A small, square section of the control panel, illuminated with a soft, green glow. Soto recoiled. "Biometric, I'm just a tech intern." Doc Ramirez frowned. "Standard procedure for high-security areas, I suppose, though I wasn't aware Sanctuary was this restricted." Rex stepped forward. "All right, let's get this over with." He placed his hand on the glowing green panel. A whirring sound emanated from within the wall, followed by a series of clicks. The green light pulsed. "Marcus Cole, head of security, Tartarus facility. Access granted," the synthesized voice announced. With a smooth hiss, the elevator doors slid open. The light that spilled in was not the harsh, sterile white of the upper levels, nor the emergency red they had grown accustomed to. It was a soft, diffused green, emanating from glowing panels set into the walls and ceiling of a wide, pristine corridor. The air was cool, clean, and carried a faint, almost imperceptible scent of pine, or something similarly fresh and organic. It was a stark, almost shocking contrast to the decay and filth they had just traversed. "See," Rex said, a hint of triumph in his voice, though he kept his guard up. He stepped out, peering down the corridor. Clean, powered, secure. Doc Ramirez followed, looking around with a mixture of relief and awe. "Incredible, it's peaceful." Soto, still hesitant, peeked out. The green light seemed to soothe her frayed nerves. She slowly uncurled from her ball. Lyra remained in the elevator, her gaze fixed on the corridor. It was too clean, too perfect, too quiet. They hear hope. Her own hope, seeing this apparent haven, felt like a dangerous thing, a vulnerability. "Chen, you coming?" Rex called from the corridor. "Or do you prefer the broken elevator?" She took a reluctant step out. The floor was some kind of polished composite, cool under her worn boots. The walls were seamless, unmarked. There were no visible pipes, no conduits, no utilitarian fixtures of the kind that define the rest of Tartarus. It felt less like a subterranean research facility and more like a high-end corporate retreat. "Where is everyone?" Lyra asked, her voice hushed. If this is a safe zone. Could be automated lockdown, Rex mused. Or maybe the primary occupants are in a central common area. This looks like an access corridor, he pointed. Signage. Central core access. An arrow glowed beneath the words, pointing further down the corridor. As they moved, Lyra noticed small, almost invisible perforations in the ceiling panels. Ventilation, or something else. The pine scent was stronger here. She also noticed the silence. Not just a lack of monstrous screeches or facility alarms, but a profound absence of ambient noise. No hum of machinery, no distant clatter, no voices. Her datapad gave a final, weak flicker and died. Vale's last warning vanished. She was on her own with her suspicions. The corridor opened into a larger, circular chamber. In the center stood a single, elegant pedestal. Atop it, under a softly glowing dome of the same green light, was a plant. It was unlike anything Lyra had ever seen. Its leaves were a deep, velvety black, veined with intricate patterns of bioluminescent green that pulsed in rhythm with the ambient lighting. It exuded the pine-like fragrance, now quite potent. What in the world? Doc Ramirez breathed, stepping closer. I've never encountered a species like this. Is it terrestrial? Project Eden, Lyra whispered, a forgotten file name from Vale's botanical notes clicking into place. He was working on self-sustaining atmospheric generators for deep-level habitation, genetically engineered flora. Soto reached out a tentative finger towards the plant. It's beautiful. Don't touch anything yet, Rex warned, though his eyes were also drawn to the strange, hypnotic plant. This place, it feels different, Soto said, a strange calmness in her voice. The terror that had gripped her earlier seemed to have evaporated, replaced by a placid curiosity. Her gaze was fixed on the pooling green leaves. So peaceful, maybe the worst is over. Doc Ramirez, too, seemed less tense. He smiled faintly. Perhaps she's right, Rex. Perhaps this is truly sanctuary. Lyra watched them, a cold dread creeping up her spine. Their sudden shift in demeanor was unnatural. The spores from the maintenance shaft. Spores. Listen. Had Vale been warning her about these spores? Were they meant to make them susceptible, to make them listen to something? The scent of pine, the pools in green light, the unnerving calm settling over Soto and Ramirez, it all felt orchestrated. Rex, Lyra said, her voice sharp, trying to cut through the tranquil atmosphere. This isn't right, their behavior. It's changed too quickly. Rex looked at her, then at Soto and Ramirez. Soto was swaying slightly, a beatific smile on her face as she stared at the plant. Ramirez was slowly running a hand along the cool, smooth wall, a look of deep contentment spreading across his features. They're just relieved, Chen, Rex said, though his brow furrowed slightly. It's been hell up there. No, it's more than relief, Lyra insisted. Remember Vale's warning. Sanctuary is bait. What if this place, this plant, this air? What if it's the trap? The synthesized voice, the same one from the elevator, echoed through the chamber, seemingly from all directions at once. Welcome, designated survivors. You have reached Project Sanctuary. Please proceed to the central core for integration. Soto turned, her eyes glazed, the green light reflecting in their depths. Integration, she murmured. Yes, we should go. She started walking towards a wide archway on the far side of the chamber, marked Central Core. Soto, wait, Lyra called. Doc Ramirez followed Soto, moving with the same dreamlike gait. It feels, right, Lyra, safe. Rex looked from them to Lyra, conflict etched on his face. The allure of safety, of order, was powerful. But Lyra's urgency, her persistent warnings, had planted a seed of doubt. Integration. What does that mean? He called out to the departing figures. They didn't respond, disappearing through the archway. We need to get them back, Lyra urged. Something is influencing them. Rex hesitated, then nodded curtly. All right, but if this is a false alarm, Chen, you'll have a lot to answer for. He unclipped a mag torch from his belt, its powerful white beam a stark contrast to the pervasive green glow. He moved towards the archway. Lyra started to follow, but a faint sound made her pause. A whisper, almost too low to hear, beneath the synthesized voice, beneath the gentle hum of the green lights. It seemed to emanate from the strange, black-leaved plant on the pedestal. She moved closer, straining to hear. It wasn't a voice made of words, but of sensation, a feeling of peace, of belonging, of surrender. It wrapped around her mind, soft and inviting, promising an end to fear, to struggle. Join us. Be one. All is well. The pine scent was intoxicating. The pulsing green light throbbed in rhythm with her own heartbeat. Lyra felt her anxieties begin to dissolve, her suspicions start to feel foolish, paranoid. This place was safety. This place was peace. Her hand reached out, unbidden, towards the velvety black leaves. Chapter 5. Fractured Echoes and Fungal Whispers. The velvety black leaf felt cool, almost silken, beneath Lyra's fingertips. A gentle thrum resonated from it up her arm, settling deep within her chest. The insidious whisper in her mind intensified, no longer a vague sensation but a chorus of soft, sibilant voices. Rest, release, become part of the harmony. No more pain, no more fear, only peace, only sanctuary. Her eyelids grew heavy. The tension that had been a knot in her shoulders for days began to unwind. This was what she needed, what everyone needed. Why fight it? A sudden, violent crackle of static, sharp as a needle, pierced the tranquil chorus. It originated from her lab coat pocket, where the dead datapad lay. The icon, which she thought extinguished, flared on the shattered screen for a microsecond, accompanied by a burst of garbled, high-frequency sound, not a voice, but a data screech. The mental whisper faltered, disrupted by the jarring noise. Lyra blinked, her head clearing slightly. The seductive peace receded, leaving a residue of confusion and a nascent horror at how easily she had succumbed. She snatched her hand away from the plant as if burned. The plant itself seemed to recoil, its bioluminescent veins dimming for a moment before resuming their steady pulse. No, she gasped, stumbling back. The alluring scent of pine now seemed cloying, suffocating. The green light felt predatory. Rex appeared in the archway leading to the central core, his mag torch beam cutting through the green haze. Chen, what are you doing? Soto and Ramirez. They're just standing there in some kind of processing chamber. Rows of pods, they won't respond. His voice was tight with alarm. He had seen something that shattered his hope in this place. It's the plant, Rex, the air, the lights. It's all designed to subdue, to make us compliant. Lyra cried, backing further away from the pedestal. Vale was right. This isn't sanctuary, it's a trap. The datapad in her pocket crackled again. Another burst of digital noise, weaker this time. On the screen, a single new word managed to form amidst the corruption before fading. Filter. Filter, what filter? Air filters, light filters. The synthesized voice spoke again, its calm tone now utterly chilling. Subject Lyra Chen exhibiting anomalous resistance. Initiate compliance protocol theta green. The intensity of the green light in the chamber increased, pulsing faster. The pine scent became overpowering. The sibilant whispers surged, louder, more insistent, clawing at the edges of her mind. You cannot resist. It is inevitable. Join. Obey. Rex, we have to get out of this room, Lyra shouted, fighting the mental assault. She fumbled for her own small LED, its weak white light a small defiance against the overwhelming green. Rex, seeing her distress and the undeniable change in the room's atmosphere, seemed to finally accept the terrifying truth. The elevator. It's our only way. He moved towards the entrance they'd come through. As Lyra turned to follow, her gaze fell upon the small, almost invisible perforations in the ceiling panels she'd noticed earlier. Spores. Spores. Listen. This wasn't just atmospheric control, it was a delivery system. The puppet master spore. It hadn't been confined to the maintenance shaft. It was here, concentrated, weaponized. The ventilation, she yelled. It's pumping something in. If they could disrupt the airflow, find the source of the filtration. A low groan echoed from the archway to the central core. Soto and Doc Ramirez appeared, walking side by side, their movements stiff, unnatural. Their eyes were wide, unfocused, the pupils dilated, reflecting the pulsing green light. They looked like marionettes, their strings pulled by an unseen hand. "Join us, Lyra," Soto said, her voice a monotone devoid of her earlier fear or personality. "The Master requires your unique perspective." "The integration is pleasant," Doc Ramirez added, a ghastly, placid smile on his face. "No more choices, only purpose." They advanced, blocking the path to the elevator. "Get behind me, Chen," Rex ordered, raising his mag torch like a club. "I'll clear a path." "Don't hurt them, Rex," Lyra pleaded. "They're not themselves." "They will hurt us if we don't move," he retorted grimly. As Soto and Ramirez closed in, Lyra frantically scanned the room. Filter. Where would an air filtration control be? Near the source. The plant. The pedestal the plant sat on was sleek, seamless. But at its base, almost hidden by the lowest tier of black leaves, Lyra spotted a small, almost invisible access panel, no bigger than her hand. "Rex, the pedestal. There might be controls." Rex parried a clumsy grab from Soto, pushing her stumbling back. Ramirez shuffled forward, his arms outstretched. "It is for the greater good, Marcus. The Master's design is perfection." "Perfection looks like a nightmare from here, Doc," Rex grunted, sidestepping. Lyra scrambled towards the pedestal, the mental whispers trying to pull her under, the cloying scent making her dizzy. She dropped to her knees, her fingers fumbling for the edge of the panel. It was magnetically sealed. Her multi-tool. She dropped it somewhere in the conduits. Her fingernails scrabbled at the hairline crack. The whispers intensified, foolish, futile, except. With a desperate pry, using the edge of her dead datapad as a lever, the panel popped open with a soft click. Inside was not a complex array of controls, but a single, large, bioluminescent fungal mass, a smaller, concentrated version of the hornet's nest they'd seen in the maintenance shaft. This was the source of the spores for this chamber, pooling in time with the plant above it. A tangle of wires led from it into the pedestal. There was no off switch. The datapad crackled again, one last desperate surge of energy from Vale's echo. The screen flared brightly, showing a partial schematic of the pedestal's internal wiring. One wire, leading directly from the fungal mass to a power conduit, was highlighted in red. Beneath it, a single, stark word: sever. Rex, I need a blade, something sharp. Rex was struggling to hold off both Soto and Ramirez, who, despite their placid expressions, possessed an unnatural, clumsy strength. Busy, Chen. Lyra looked around wildly. A shard of broken composite from the damaged catwalk section in the shaft above. She remembered stuffing it into her pocket, thinking it might be useful. Her fingers closed around its jagged edge. She reached into the opening towards the glowing fungal heart. The whispers in her mind shrieked, a chorus of psychic rage. No, you will not interfere. The air around the fungal mass shimmered. The scent of pine became acrid, burning her nostrils. Her vision swam. Ignoring the pain, the mental assault, she sawed at the highlighted wire with the sharp edge of the composite shard. Sparks flew. The wire was tougher than it looked. Soto and Ramirez faltered in their attack on Rex, their movements becoming jerky, disoriented, as if their control was being disrupted. Almost there, Lyra grunted, putting all her weight into it. The wire snapped. The pulsing green light throughout the chamber stuttered, then died, plunging them into the stark, less oppressive white light of Rex's mag torch and Lyra's small LED. The overpowering pine scent diminished rapidly, replaced by the faint, metallic smell of ozone and burned wiring. The sibilant whispers in Lyra's head vanished, leaving behind a ringing silence and a throbbing headache. Soto and Ramirez collapsed to the floor, their limbs twitching, then lay still, groaning softly. The glazed look in their eyes began to recede, replaced by confusion and pain. What happened? Soto murmured, clutching her head. The plant, Lyra panted, pointing with the composite shard. It was controlling them, the spores. The black-leaved plant on the pedestal drooped, its bioluminescent veins fading to a dull, sickly green. It looked dead. Rex stared from the unconscious forms of Soto and Ramirez to Lyra, then to the sparking wires in the pedestal. You did it, Chen. You actually did it. A grudging respect entered his tone. Vale helped, Lyra said, looking at the now completely dark screen of her datapad. His echo. The reprieve was short-lived. A new sound filled the chamber, a deep, resonant thrumming, seemingly coming from the walls themselves, from the direction of the central core. It was accompanied by a chorus of high-pitched clicks and guttural growls, much louder and more numerous than anything they had encountered before. "The Master requires your presence," a new voice echoed through the chamber. It was not synthesized. It was deep, resonant, and filled with an ancient, chilling intelligence. It seemed to vibrate in Lyra's very bones. "The disruption is noted and will be rectified." The floor beneath their feet trembled. "I don't think we killed the brain," Rex said grimly, "just knocked out a local transmitter." He hauled Doc Ramirez to his feet. "Can you walk, Doc?" Ramirez, groggy but lucid, nodded. "I think so, my head." Lyra helped Soto up. The young technician was still dazed. What was that voice? "Trouble," Rex stated. "Big trouble. Elevator. Now, before whatever that is decides to pay us a personal visit." They scrambled towards the elevator, the one that had brought them to this false sanctuary. The doors were still open. Rex jabbed the door close button, then frantically hit the button for level 8, then 7, then any button that wasn't level 9. Nothing happened. The elevator remained stubbornly inert. The green light on the level 9 call button outside the elevator began to pulse, slowly, malevolently. "It's locked us in," Lyra said, her voice tight with dawning horror. "It knows we're here, and it's not happy." The thrumming from the central core intensified. The archway leading to it began to glow with an angry, crimson light, and from within, the sounds of approaching monstrosities grew deafening. Project Sanctuary was no longer a baited trap. It was about to become a feeding ground. Chapter 6: Desperate Ducts and Dying Hopes. The crimson glow from the central core archway pulsed like a monstrous heartbeat, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with the approaching cacophony. The thrumming vibration intensified, shaking dust from the pristine ceiling panels of the false sanctuary. Rex hammered the elevator control panel with the butt of his mag torch, each strike a dull thud of desperation. The buttons remained unresponsive, the level 9 indicator outside the open doors glowing with that same mocking, malevolent green. "Useless piece of junk," Rex snarled, abandoning the panel. "It's cut power to the car or fried the controls from its end." He swept the beam of his torch around the antechamber. "There has to be another way out. Maintenance hatch, emergency stairs, anything." Lyra's mind raced. They were trapped on level 9, the supposed pinnacle of safety, now revealed as the lair of the Master, whatever that entity was. The echoes of its deep, resonant voice still seemed to vibrate in her bones. "The disruption is noted and will be rectified." Rectification, she suspected, would be exceedingly unpleasant. Soto, still pale and shaky from her experience with the puppet master spores, pointed a trembling finger towards the ceiling. "Up there, remember those perforations? For the spores. Maybe they connect to a ventilation system." Lyra followed her gaze. The small, almost invisible holes were arranged in a grid pattern. "It's possible. Industrial ventilation shafts are sometimes large enough to crawl through, but finding an access point." Doc Ramirez, leaning heavily against a wall, coughed. "The air. It's changing again, thicker, that sweet smell is returning." Lyra sniffed. He was right. The acrid scent of burned wiring from the sabotaged pedestal was being subtly overpowered by the cloying, pine-like fragrance. The master was reasserting its atmospheric control, perhaps through a secondary system. The mental whispers hadn't returned, not yet, but the oppressive feeling of the green-lit chamber was creeping back. A series of heavy, rhythmic impacts sounded from the central core, growing rapidly closer. Not the clicking of chitin or the slithering of tendrils, but something more. Deliberate. Footsteps. Heavy, ponderous footsteps, accompanied by the guttural snarls of multiple creatures. No time for finesse, Rex growled. He scanned the walls, his torch beam playing over the seamless composite. These panels have to come off. There's got to be a utility space behind them. He found a spot where two panels met. A hairline seemed barely visible. He jammed the pointed end of his mag torch into the crack and heaved. The composite creaked, then splintered. Rex grunted with effort, prying a section loose. It came away with a crack, revealing not a utility space but solid, reinforced concrete. Damn it, solid construction. The footsteps were almost upon them. Shadows, monstrous and distorted, began to stretch from the crimson-lit archway. Lyra spotted it then, high up on the wall near the ceiling, partially obscured by a decorative lighting valance. A standard maintenance access panel, painted the same unobtrusive color as the walls, easily missed. It was small, perhaps only 2 feet square. Rex, up there. Rex swung his torch beam upwards. Good eyes, Chen. He looked around. How do we reach it? The pedestal that had held the now-dead plant was the only object of significant height in the room. Give me a hand with this. He and Lyra strained, pushing the heavy pedestal across the polished floor towards the wall beneath the access panel. It scraped loudly, a sound that seemed to momentarily silence the approaching horrors. Then, a deafening roar erupted from the archway, filled with rage and hunger. Faster, Lyra urged. They maneuvered the pedestal into place. Rex clambered onto it, his boots finding purchase on its smooth surface. He could just reach the panel. Latch is rusted or sealed, won't budge. He struck it hard with his elbow. The panel dented but held. The first creature appeared in the archway. It was bipedal, vaguely humanoid in silhouette but grotesquely swollen, its flesh a mottled patchwork of gray and sickly green. Its arms were too long, ending in massive clawed hands. Its head was a featureless lump, save for a gaping, circular maw filled with needle-like teeth. It sniffed the air, its eyeless head swiveling towards them. 2 more, identical in their horror, shambled into view behind it. Amalgam butchers, Lyra thought, the name a grim invention of her horrified mind. They were clearly bioengineered, cobbled together from nightmares. Sodo, Doc, get ready to climb, Rex yelled, smashing the panel again with his mag torch. This time a corner buckled. He got his fingers under it and wrenched. With a shriek of tearing metal, the panel ripped free, clattering to the floor. A dark, narrow opening was revealed. Go, Chen, you're the lightest, Rex ordered, glancing nervously at the advancing amalgam butchers. Lyra scrambled onto the pedestal, then onto Rex's offered shoulder, reaching for the opening. It was a tight squeeze. She wriggled through, her clothes snagging on rough metal edges into a dusty, cramped ventilation duct. It was pitch black. She fumbled for her small LED, its beam revealing a space barely wide enough to crawl. "Soto, your turn," Rex grunted, dodging a clumsy swipe from the lead butcher. Soto, spurred by sheer terror, practically flew onto the pedestal and through the opening, Lyra helping to pull her in. The butchers were closer now, their guttural snarls filling the antechamber. They moved with a deceptive speed for their bulk. Doc Ramirez was next. He was slower, his age and recent ordeal taking their toll. Rex tried to fend off the butchers, using the heavy mag torch as a bludgeon. He landed a solid blow on one creature's arm, eliciting a gurgling shriek, but another grabbed his leg, its claws tearing through his coveralls. "Rex!" Lyra screamed from the duct. "Get him up here!" Rex roared, kicking out, his heel connecting with the butcher's featureless face. It stumbled back, momentarily dazed. He pushed Doc Ramirez towards the pedestal. "Climb, Doc, climb!" Ramirez, with Lyra and Soto pulling from above and Rex shoving from below, managed to heave himself into the narrow duct. He collapsed, panting, his face ashen. Rex was alone now with the three amalgam butchers. They advanced, cutting off his escape to the pedestal. He backed away towards the open elevator car his mag torch held defensively. "There's another way for me," he said, his voice strained. "Keep moving, find a way to level 8, get a message out." "Rex, no!" Lyra cried, reaching out from the duct as if she could somehow pull him to safety. He gave a grim, almost feral smile. "Someone has to create a diversion." He threw his mag torch high into the air. As it tumbled, its beam disorientingly illuminating the scene, he turned and sprinted, not towards the duct, but directly into the crimson-lit archway leading to the central core. The amalgam butchers, momentarily confused by the thrown torch and their prey's unexpected maneuver, hesitated. Then, with renewed howls, they lumbered after him into the depths of level 9. Lyra stared in horror at the empty archway, now only faintly illuminated by the distant crimson glow. Rex Cole, the pragmatic, hard-nosed security chief, had sacrificed himself. The sounds of his desperate fight, the shrieks of the butchers, receded into the core, punctuated by a final, defiant roar from Rex, then an abrupt, sickening silence. Soto was crying silently. Doc Ramirez closed his eyes, muttering a prayer. Lyra felt a cold hollowness. Rex, for all his abrasive nature, had been a bulwark. Now they were truly on their own. "We can't let it be for nothing," she said, her voice hoarse. "He bought us time. We have to move." She turned and began to crawl deeper into the ventilation duct. The weak beam of her led her only guide. The duct was choked with dust and cobwebs, the air stale and metallic. It branched several times. No schematics, no signs, just darkness and uncertainty. They crawled in silence for what felt like hours, the only sounds their own labored breathing and the scrape of their bodies against the metal. Lyra tried to keep track of their turns, to maintain a sense of direction, but it was hopeless. The ducts twisted and turned, sloped up and down. At one point, they passed over a graded section that looked down into a brightly lit laboratory filled with rows upon rows of glass tanks. Inside the tanks, pale, vaguely humanoid shapes floated in murky fluid, connected by umbilicals to complex machinery, unfinished experiments, or raw materials for the master's creations. Lyra didn't want to know. She urged Soto and Ramirez past it quickly. The air grew colder. A faint draft suggested they were moving away from the artificially controlled atmosphere of Level 9's core. Hope, a fragile seedling, began to sprout in Lyra's chest. Then they heard it, a faint, rhythmic clicking, seemingly coming from all directions within the duct system. Not the heavy sound of the butchers, but something smaller, more numerous, and closer. "What now?" Soto whispered, her voice trembling. Lyra shone her light around. On the dusty floor of the duct she saw them, small, iridescent beetles, no bigger than her thumbnail, scuttling along the metal. Dozens of them, hundreds. They were emerging from tiny perforations in the duct walls, a silent, skittering tide. Security mites, Doc Ramirez hazarded a guess. Some kind of automated pest control. Lyra didn't think so. These felt purposeful. She remembered the architect termites she'd glimpsed in her fragmented knowledge of creatures that reconfigured lab structures. Were these related? One of the beetles scuttled onto Soto's hand. She yelped, shaking it off. Where it had touched, a small, red welt was already forming. They bite. The clicking intensified. The beetles were swarming, converging on them from all directions. Lyra realized with dawning horror they weren't just random pests. They were hurting them, or perhaps sealing them in. Some of the beetles were carrying tiny flecks of a fibrous, web-like substance, using it to block smaller, intersecting ducts. "They're cutting off our escape routes," Lyra exclaimed. "We need to find a shaft and exit anything." She pushed forward, crawling faster, heedless of the beetles scuttling over her hands and clothes, their tiny bites like pinpricks of fire. Behind her, Soto and Ramirez struggled to keep up, their cries of pain and fear echoing in the confined space. The main duct ahead narrowed abruptly. Lyra shone her light. It was almost completely blocked by a thick, gray, fibrous webbing, alive with the iridescent beetles. A dead end. Trapped again. The dying hope in Lyra's chest withered. Rex's sacrifice, their desperate crawl through the suffocating darkness, had it all been for this? To be cornered by glorified insects in the bowels of a madhouse facility. The silence from the central core felt more ominous now than the roars. The master was patient. Its tendrils were everywhere. Chapter 7. Echoes of Vale's Folly. The fibrous webbing sealing the duct pulsed faintly, the iridescent beetles working with an eerie, coordinated diligence. Lyra pushed against it. The material was surprisingly strong, like tightly woven sinew. Behind them, the clicking tide of more beetles advanced, their tiny bites a constant torment. "We're boxed in," Doc Ramirez said, his voice heavy with resignation. He slumped against the duct wall, nursing his bitten hands. Sode was curled up, trying to protect her face, her shoulders shaking. Lyra refused to yield. There had to be a way. She ran her hands along the floor of the duct, searching for any irregularity, any loose panel or weakened seam. Her fingers brushed against a raised edge. A floor grate bolted down. Hope, that stubborn weed, flickered again. "Here," she exclaimed, tugging at it. "Help me." Ramirez, roused by her urgency, crawled over. Together they strained at the grate. The bolts were rusted tight. The beetles swarmed over their hands, their bites increasingly painful. Lyra ignored them, focusing all her strength on the grate. With a groan of tortured metal, one bolt snapped. Then another. The grate came loose with a sudden clang, revealing a dark opening below. A rush of colder, slightly fresher air wafted up. It smelled of damp concrete and something else, something earthy like soil. "A service tunnel," Ramirez hazarded, "or an older, decommissioned level." "Doesn't matter," Lyra panted, peering down. It was too dark to see the bottom. "It's a way out of these ducts." She dropped her small lead down the hole. It fell for a second, then landed with a soft thud perhaps 10 feet below. "It's not too far. I'll go first. So then you dock." She swung her legs into the opening and lowered herself, her hands gripping the rough edges of the duct floor. She dropped, landing awkwardly on a debris-strewn floor. The LED lay nearby, casting a weak circle of light. She was in a narrow, circular tunnel, its walls made of rough-hewn rock and crumbling brickwork, starkly different from the sterile plasteel and composite of the upper levels. This part of Tartarus was ancient. Soto followed, landing with a gasp. Ramirez came last, grunting with the effort. He looked around, his brow furrowed. This feels like the old geothermal access tunnels, pre-Omni Corp. They were supposed to have been sealed off decades ago. The earthy smell was stronger here, and there was another scent, faint but familiar to Lyra from her botanical work, petrichor, the smell of rain on dry earth. Impossible, miles underground. As her eyes adjusted, Lyra saw that the tunnel wasn't entirely dark. A faint, ghostly luminescence emanated from patches of moss clinging to the damp walls. Bioluminescent fungi, similar to some of Vale's less exotic experiments. They moved cautiously down the tunnel, the only sound their footsteps crunching on grit and fallen pebbles. The air grew steadily cooler, damper. The tunnel began to slope downwards more steeply. After several minutes, they rounded a bend and stopped dead. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, and in the center of the cavern, bathed in the ethereal glow of countless luminescent fungi, was a forest. Not a true forest, but a bizarre subterranean ecosystem. Twisted, pale trees, their bark like bleached bone, reached towards the unseen cavern roof. Strange, colorless ferns carpeted the ground, and everywhere the source of the ghostly light. Fungi of every imaginable shape and size, glowing with soft blues, greens, and violets. The air hummed with a low, almost subaudible vibration. "By all the saints," Ramirez whispered, awestruck, "what is this place?" Lyra recognized some of the plant species, or at least their heavily modified descendants. These were iterations of Chiron Vale's Project Eden flora, the original, benign experiments for self-sustaining deep-level biospheres. But these were wild, overgrown, mutated beyond their original designs. This cavern was a lost world, a forgotten chapter of Tartarus's history. Vale's original arboretum, Lyra mused. He must have used these old geothermal tunnels for his early prototypes, before Omni Corp repurposed his research for Project Sanctuary. As they stepped into the cavern, the low hum intensified. It wasn't just a sound. Lyra felt it in her teeth, in her bones. And mixed with it another sound, whispers. Not the insidious mental chorus of level 9, but actual faint voices, seeming to sigh from the ghostly trees, from the glowing fungi. Chiron, is that you? A soft, feminine voice seemed to breathe. He promised, sanctuary. Another, more melancholic voice murmured. Soto clutched Lyra's arm. Did you hear that? Lyra nodded slowly. I think these are the other echoes. Vale's datapad had been Vale Echo FRGMNT01. Were there others, trapped consciousnesses, or something else? A figure detached itself from the shadows beneath a particularly large, glowing mushroom. It was tall, gaunt, and draped in what looked like tattered remnants of a lab coat, now overgrown with faintly luminous moss. Its face was obscured by shadow and tangled hair, but its movements were slow, almost mournful. Visitors. The voice was dry, rasping like autumn leaves skittering across stone. It was recognizably human but stretched thin, ethereal. So few come this way now, since Chiron fell silent. Doc Ramirez stepped forward cautiously. Who are you? How did you get here? The figure gestured vaguely. We were the first, the pioneers of Eden before the shift, before the master awoke in the levels above. It turned its shadowed face towards Lyra. You carry a spark of Chiron's light, a fragment. We felt it. His datapad, Lyra said, holding up the inert device. His echo helped us. He tried to warn us, the figure lamented. About sanctuary, about what it would become. He built this place. It gestured to the fungal forest as a true refuge. But OmniCorp twisted his vision. They wanted control, not harmony. They wanted a weapon, not a haven. The master, Lyra pressed. What is it? What created it? The figure seemed to shrink back, born of their hubris, an amalgamation of extremophile research, AI sentience, and something older, something Tartarus disturbed in the deep rock. Chiron called it the geode mind. OmniCorp thought they could control it, harness its computational power. Instead, it consumed their network, their research, their people. It learned. It evolved. It desires to integrate all consciousness into its own. The description sent a fresh wave of chills down Lyra's spine. This master was far more complex, far more terrifying than a mere escaped experiment. Chiron believed there was a way to contain it, the figure continued. A failsafe, hidden deep within his original Eden schematics, a way to sever its connection to the facility's core systems, to isolate it, but he never finished. The awakening was too swift. Where are these schematics? Lyra asked urgently. The figure pointed a moss-draped finger towards the center of the cavern, where a particularly large, gnarled tree stood, its roots like writhing serpents, its branches glowing with an intense blue light. His sanctum, within the heartwood, but it is guarded, not by the master's puppets, but by the sorrow of this place, by the echoes of those who embraced Eden too deeply and lost themselves when its light began to fade. As if on cue, other figures began to emerge from the fungal gloom. They were similar to the first, draped in moss and shadow, their forms indistinct, their movements slow and sorrowful. They converged silently, forming a loose circle around the heartwood tree. Their whispers grew louder, a chorus of regret and longing. Stay with us. Share our eternal twilight. Forget the horrors above. They are the lost choir, the first figure explained. They offer solace, but it is the solace of stagnation. To reach the heartwood, you must pass through their despair and not succumb to it. Lyra looked at Soto, who was pale but resolute. Doc Ramirez, despite his exhaustion, straightened his shoulders. Rex's sacrifice, Vale's fragmented warnings, the desperate flight through the ducts, it had all led here. To a forgotten forest, a chorus of sorrow, and perhaps the last, desperate hope for Tartarus. We have to try, Lyra said. For Rex, for everyone still trapped above, for Dr. Vale. She took a deep breath, the scent of damp earth and glowing fungi filling her lungs, and stepped forward, towards the mournful whispers of the lost choir and the secrets hidden within Chiron Vale's heartwood. Chapter 8: The Sorrow of the Lost Choir. As Lyra, Soto, and Doc Ramirez approached the heartwood tree, the lost choir converged, their shadowy forms drifting like smoke in the ethereal bioluminescence. Their whispers intensified, no longer just mournful sighs but a seductive tapestry of sorrowful temptations. Why strive? Why suffer? One voice, thin and reedy, seemed to brush against Lyra's ear. The world above is pain. Here there is only quiet forgetting. Your efforts are futile, another, deeper and resonant, murmured from the direction of a towering, violet-capped mushroom. The master is inevitable. Its embrace is oblivion, but a gentle one. Lyra pushed the whispers away, focusing on the gnarled, blue-glowing heartwood. The first figure, their guide, had called itself Veridian, a name that seemed to suit its moss-draped form. Veridian watched them from the edge of the clearing, its shadowed face unreadable. Soto faltered, her steps slowing. Her eyes, wide and haunted, darted between the sorrowful figures of the choir. They sound so sad, so tired. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. Maybe they're right. What's the point? Soto, no. Lyra grabbed her arm, her grip tight. Don't listen to them. It's a trap just like level 9, but different. This one preys on despair, not false hope. Doc Ramirez, surprisingly, seemed less affected. His gaze was fixed on the heartwood, a flicker of scientific curiosity or perhaps a deeper understanding in his eyes. Their neural pathways must be altered, trapped in a feedback loop of grief, amplified by the local fungal network, fascinating in a horrifying way. He shook his head as if clearing it. But not for us. We have a purpose. The lost choir eddied around them, their touchless forms brushing past, leaving trails of cold air and profound melancholy. The whispers became more personal, more insidious. You failed them, Lyra Chen, a voice that sounded chillingly like her old botany professor hissed. Your mosses, your research, all for naught. Tartarus falls and you with it. Remember the screams from Gamma Wing, Dr. Ramirez. Another voice, sharp and accusatory, whispered, you could have saved more. You were too slow. Little Soto, a deceptively gentle voice, crooned, so afraid, always running. There is no escape. Surrender to the quiet, it doesn't hurt. Soto whimpered, pulling away from Lyra. I can't. It's too much. She sank to her knees, covering her ears, but the whispers were inside their heads now, not just in the air. Lyra fought against a wave of her own despair. Images of Rex's sacrifice, the dying pulse of Vale's datapad, the horrors in the upper levels, they all surged, threatening to overwhelm her. The choir's sorrow was a potent weapon, feeding on their existing trauma. They're using our memories, our fears, Lyra realized aloud, trying to cut through the fog in her own mind. It's an illusion, Soto, a projection. Viridian's voice, dry and distant, carried across the clearing. They offer what they believe is kindness, an end to suffering, but it is the end of self. Chiron fought against it. He sought to preserve identity, even in the face of oblivion. Identity is pain, a chorus of voices sighed. Lose yourself. Become one with the sorrowful song of Eden. Doc Ramirez stumbled, his face contorting in anguish. My wife, Anna, she's calling to me, from the quiet place. Doc, she's gone, Lyra cried, though her own heart ached with a phantom grief. They're twisting your love for her. She had to break their hold. But how? Logic was failing, reassurance was being drowned out. She thought of Vale's datapad. The bursts of static, the data screeches that had momentarily disrupted the Master's influence on Level 9. It wasn't just information, it was a signal, a counterfrequency. Lyra closed her eyes, shutting out the mournful figures, the seductive whispers. She focused inward, trying to recall the exact pitch, the jarring quality of those digital shrieks. It was a desperate gamble. She had no device to replicate it, only her own voice. She took a deep breath and screamed. Not a scream of terror, though there was certainly fear fueling it, but a scream of defiance, of raw, untamed emotion, pitched as high and as gratingly as she could manage, trying to mimic the disruptive quality of Vale's fragmented echo. The effect was instantaneous. The lost choir recoiled as if struck. Their shadowy forms flickered, their whispers dissolving into discordant shrieks of their own, shrieks of pain, of surprise. The sorrowful atmosphere fractured like shattered glass. Soto gasped, her hands falling from her ears. Doc Ramirez blinked, the haunted look in his eyes receding. The images, the phantom voices that had tormented them, vanished. What? Soto stammered, looking around at the now agitated, flickering forms of the choir. Dissonance, Lyra panted, her throat raw. They can't handle strong, discordant emotion. Their sorrow is a harmony. I just broke the chord. Viridian glided forward, its mossy draperies swirling. Chiron spoke of such counter-resonances, a way to disrupt passive mimetic fields. You are more resourceful than I anticipated. The lost choir, though disrupted, did not disperse. They eddied at the edge of the clearing, their forms less distinct, their whispers now a confused, angry babble rather than a seductive song. They were still a barrier, but a weakened one. The heartwood, Lyra said, pointing. We don't have much time before they regroup, or before the Master above realizes we're still active. They pushed forward through the lingering unease towards the ancient, glowing tree. Its bark was gnarled and deeply fissured, the blue light emanating from within these cracks. As they drew closer, Lyra saw intricate carvings in the wood, not natural patterns, but deliberate symbols, like some forgotten technological language. At the base of the tree, a section of the trunk was smoother, almost like a sealed door, the blue light around its edges more intense. There was no handle, no visible mechanism. "How do we open it?" Soto asked. Doc Ramirez ran his hand over the carved symbols. "This isn't just a tree, it's integrated biotechnology. Vale was a genius." Lyra examined the door. One symbol, repeated several times around its perimeter, caught her eye. It was a complex spiral, almost identical to the corrupted file icon for Vale Echo FRGMNT01 on her datapad. "His echo," she murmured. "The datapad is dead, but the symbol is a key." She traced the spiral on the tree trunk with her finger. As her finger completed the shape, the blue light around the door flared. A low hum resonated from within the heartwood, deeper and more powerful than the ambient vibration of the cavern. With a soft click, the section of trunk slid inwards, then sideways, revealing a dark opening. A wave of cool, dry air washed out, carrying the scent of old parchment and dormant electronics. "His sanctum," Veridian whispered from behind them. "What you seek lies within, but be warned. Knowledge carries its own burdens, and some secrets are best left undisturbed." Lyra met Doc Ramirez's gaze, then Soto's. There was no turning back now. With a shared nod, they stepped through the opening, into the hidden heart of Chiron Vale's lost Eden. The whispers of the recovering lost choir pursued them, but fainter now, tinged with a new note of fearful respect. Chapter 9: The Failsafe Protocol. The interior of the Heartwood was a stark contrast to the bioluminescent wilderness outside. It was a small, circular chamber, lined not with bark, but with smooth, metallic panels that glowed with a soft, internal white light. Banks of sophisticated equipment, surprisingly intact despite the decades, lined the walls. Screens were dark, indicator lights unlit, but the air was cool and dry, suggesting some form of stasis field or environmental control had been active. In the center of the room, on a simple stone pedestal, rested a single crystalline datapad, much larger and more complex than the standard OmniCorp issue. It pulsed with a faint, internal blue light, mirroring the glow of the Heartwood itself. "Incredible," Doc Ramirez breathed, running a reverent hand over a bank of silent machinery. "This is generations beyond the tech in the upper facility. Vale was light years ahead." Soto, her earlier fear replaced by a technician's curiosity, peered at a complex interface. "Is any of this still functional?" Lyra moved towards the central pedestal. This had to be it, Vale's core research, his failsafe. The crystalline datapad felt cool to the touch. As her fingers brushed its surface, it chimed softly, and the screens around the room flickered to life, displaying complex schematics, lines of elegant code, and star charts Lyra didn't recognize. A holographic projector in the ceiling whirred, casting a three-dimensional image into the center of the room. It was a shimmering, translucent representation of Chiron Vale himself. Not a recording, Lyra realized, but an interactive AI construct, an echo far more complete than the fragmented warnings she had received. "Welcome," the Veil hologram said, his voice calm, synthesized yet imbued with a familiar cadence Lyra recalled from his lectures. It has been 8,427 cycles since primary system shut down. Your biometrics indicate you are Lyra Chen, botanist, Ernesto Ramirez, medical officer, and Paya Soto, engineering intern. You have deviated significantly from expected survival parameters. A hint of dry humor touched his spectral lips. Dr. Vale, Lyra stammered, awestruck. A persistent personality matrix, to be precise, the hologram corrected. My consciousness, or a detailed facsimile thereof, imprinted onto the Eden core moments before my departure. His spectral eyes seemed to hold a deep sadness. Omnicorp operatives became insistent. My work was deemed a threat to their revised Project Sanctuary. We know, Lyra said. Sanctuary is a trap, the master. Ah, yes, the geode mind, my most profound failure, Veil Prime, as Lyra now thought of this complete echo sighed. I sought to create a symbiotic intelligence to manage Tartarus's deep-level ecosystems. Omnicorp saw only a biological supercomputer to be exploited. They pushed its development too fast, integrated it too deeply into compromised systems before the ethical protocols and containment fields were stable. It learned avarice from them, and fear, a dangerous combination. Veridian said you had a failsafe, Doc Ramirez interjected, a way to contain it. Veil Prime nodded, gesturing towards the crystalline data pad. The Event Horizon Protocol, not a weapon as Omnicorp desired, but a severance. The geode mind has wrapped its tendrils around Tartarus's primary power core and its central data nexus. The protocol is designed to create a cascading systems collapse targeted only at those integrated systems, effectively amputating the geode mind from its power source and its control network. It would isolate level 9 and the deeper levels, entombing the entity. The upper facility might survive if the structural integrity holds. Entombing it, Soto asked, her voice small, but what about us? A somber expression crossed Veil Prime's face. The protocol requires a manual initiation sequence from within this chamber. Once activated, the heartwood will become the focal point of the cascade. This chamber will be compromised. There is no escape route from here after initiation. A chilling silence filled the chamber. The hope that had carried them this far curdled into a stark, terrible choice. Save Tartarus, save potentially thousands on the upper levels, but at the cost of their own lives. You mean it's a suicide mission? Lyra asked, her voice barely a whisper. A sacrifice, Miss Chen, Veil Prime corrected gently. As was mine in its own way. I designed this chamber to protect the protocol, not its activators. I did not foresee anyone else reaching it. Doc Ramirez sank onto a low stool, his face pale. Soto stared at the crystalline data pad as if it were a venomous snake. Lyra felt a wave of dizziness. All this way, all this struggle, only to be faced with an impossible choice. Rex's sacrifice, Veridian's guidance, the fight against the lost choir. It all felt like a cruel joke. Is there no other way? She asked, clinging to a shred of hope. Can't the protocol be activated remotely, delayed? Veil Prime shook his head. The geode mind's adaptive firewalls are too sophisticated. It has learned to anticipate remote attacks. The initiation sequence requires direct, real-time biosignature verification and phased manual overrides that can only be performed physically at these consoles. Any attempt to automate or delay it would be detected and countered. This is a surgical strike, Miss Chen, requiring a surgeon on site. He gestured to the main console. The sequence is complex. It requires precise timing and coordinated input from 3 separate stations. I designed it assuming I would be the one to. He paused. It appears fate, or perhaps the failing echoes of my earlier self, had other plans for my legacy. Lyra looked at her companions. Soto was openly weeping now. Doc Ramirez stared blankly at the floor, the weight of their situation crushing him. Could she do it? Could she ask them to do it? To trade their lives for a chance that others might survive? What if the protocol failed? What if the structural integrity of Tartarus didn't hold and the entire facility collapsed anyway? How long, Lyra began, how long until the Master rectifies our disruption, until its creatures break through into this cavern? Based on its current rate of adaptation and resource reallocation following your intervention on level 9, Vale Prime calculated, his spectral eyes flickering with data. I estimate you have less than 1 standard hour before its primary hunter-killer organisms breach the Eden Cavern perimeter. They will be significantly more formidable than the amalgam butchers you encountered. Less than an hour to decide their fate and the fate of Tartarus. What if we just leave? Soda whispered, her voice raw with fear. Take the schematics, try to get to the upper levels, warn them. The geode mind already knows you are here, Miss Soto, Vale Prime stated. It knows you have accessed my core data. It will not permit that information to leave this sector. Every exit will be sealed, every path guarded by its most potent creations. And even if you did escape, by the time you reached anyone in authority, it would be too late. Its integration with the facility's core systems will be complete. The protocol is your only remaining offensive option. Lyra walked over to the crystalline data pad. On its surface, the first step of the Event Horizon Protocol was displayed. Phase 1 initiation. Confirm biosignatures at all 3 terminals. 3 handprint scanners glowed invitingly on the consoles around the room. She thought of Rex's defiant roar as he charged into the depths of level 9. She thought of the countless unseen personnel on the upper levels, oblivious to the true horror evolving beneath them. She thought of Kyron Vale, who had foreseen this and prepared for it, even if it meant his own end. Dr. Vale, Lyra said, her voice surprisingly steady, explained the initiation sequence in detail. Doc Ramirez looked up, a flicker of understanding, then grim acceptance in his eyes. Soto wiped her tears, her expression hardening with a desperate resolve she hadn't possessed before. The choice was terrible, but the alternative, letting the Master win, letting Rex's sacrifice be for nothing, was unthinkable. The sanctuary of the Heartwood had revealed its price, and it was a price they were now, however reluctantly, considering paying. Chapter 10. The Ticking Clock of Sacrifice. Vale Prime's holographic form shimmered as he began the grim tutorial. The Event Horizon Protocol is a 3-stage sequence. Each stage requires simultaneous confirmation from all three active terminals. Stage 1, as you see, is biometric verification and system handshake. This confirms to the Eden core that sentient, authorized operators are present and initiates the primary power conduits for the protocol. He gestured, and holographic overlays appeared above each of the three designated consoles, detailing their specific functions for the subsequent stages. Terminal Alpha, designated for Miss Chen, will manage the targeted data purge of the geode mine's neural network within Tartarus's central servers. It's a precise erasure, like snipping specific threads in a vast web. Terminal Beta, for Dr. Ramirez, controls the phased shutdown of the primary geothermal power taps feeding level 9 and below. This will starve the geode mind of the immense energy it requires to sustain its expanded consciousness and biomanufacturing processes. Terminal Gamma, for Miss Soto, will execute a series of controlled overloads in the secondary power relays, creating a cascading failure that will physically sever the connections between the lower and upper levels of Tartarus. This is the amputation, designed to prevent the geode mind from simply rerouting power or data through backup conduits. His spectral gaze met each of theirs in turn. Each stage is time-sensitive. Once a stage is initiated, you will have precisely 60 seconds to complete your individual tasks and provide confirmation. Failure to confirm at all three terminals within the window will abort the protocol, and the system will require a full reset, a reset we will not have time for. The geode mind will adapt to the failed attempt, making a second try impossible. 60 seconds per stage, Soto breathed, her eyes wide. The code sequences on this schematic, they're incredibly complex. The Eden core will assist, Veil Prime assured her. It will guide your inputs, but the final authorizations, the critical commands, must be entered manually. This is to prevent any external hijacking of the process. You are the final failsafe. Lyra studied Terminal Alpha. The interface was daunting, lines of code scrolling rapidly, intricate network diagrams pulsing. The responsibility felt crushing. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, and it was all over. A deep tremor shook the Heartwood chamber, more violent than any they had experienced before. Dust sifted from the metallic ceiling panels. A hairline crack appeared on one of the inactive monitor screens. The perimeter of Eden Cavern has been breached, Veil Prime announced, his calm voice a stark contrast to the growing dread. Estimated time until hostiles reach the Heartwood, 45 minutes. The ticking clock had just sped up. We need to decide, Doc Ramirez said, his voice heavy but firm. He looked at Lyra, then at Soto. I'm willing, for my honor, for the chance that others might not suffer as she did as we have. Soto nodded slowly, her youthful face set in a mask of grim determination. I never thought. I just wanted to be an engineer, but if this is what it takes, I'm in. Her gaze flickered towards the entrance of the Heartwood, as if expecting monsters to pour in at any moment. Lyra took a deep breath. Their courage, their willingness to face this solidified her own resolve. All right, Dr. Vale, we're ready. Walk us through the first set of commands for each terminal. For the next precious 20 minutes, Veil Prime meticulously detailed the precise sequences, the critical override codes, the confirmation protocols for each stage, for each terminal. They ran through simulations, their fingers flying over phantom controls, memorizing, practicing, the holographic instructor patiently correcting their errors. The pressure was immense. The fate of Tartarus rested on their ability to perform these complex tasks flawlessly, under unimaginable duress. Another tremor, stronger still, rocked the chamber. This time, a low, guttural roar accompanied it, audible even through the thick walls of the heartwood, the sound of something immense and furious, drawing closer. Hostiles have overcome Veridian and the remnants of the lost choir, Veil Prime reported, a note of something akin to sorrow in his synthesized voice. They are in the main cavern. Estimated time until they reach this chamber, 20 minutes. We're out of time for more practice, Lyra stated, her heart pounding. We do it now or we don't do it at all. She looked at Ramirez and Soto. Ready. They both nodded, their faces pale but resolute. They moved to their designated terminals. Lyra stood before Alpha, Ramirez at Beta, Soto at Gamma. Remember, Veil Prime said, his holographic form now positioned in the center where he could observe all three of them. Precision, speed, and courage, the fate of many rests upon you. He paused. It has been an honor, however brief, to assist you. Chiron Veil's work will not be in vain. Lyra placed her hand on the scanner at Terminal Alpha. It glowed green. Biometric signature Lyra Chen confirmed. At Terminal Beta, Ramirez did the same. Biometric signature ERNESTO RAMIREZ confirmed. Soto, her hand trembling slightly, pressed it to Terminal Gamma. Biometric signature PIA SOTO confirmed. All three signatures confirmed, Veil Prime announced. Event Horizon Protocol Stage 1 initiated. You have 60 seconds to input primary handshake codes and confirm system readiness. The clock starts now. A large holographic timer appeared in the center of the room, its crimson numerals already counting down from 60. Lyra's fingers flew across her console, lines of code scrolling past as she entered the complex authorization sequence Veil Prime had drilled into them. Her mind raced, focusing solely on the task, blocking out the roars from outside, the tremors, the crushing weight of their impending sacrifice. 50 seconds remaining. Ramirez grunted with concentration, his brow furrowed as he navigated his own complex inputs. Soto, surprisingly, seemed the calmest, her movements economical and precise as she worked her terminal. 40 seconds remaining. A deafening crash sounded from just outside the Heartwood entrance. The reinforced door shuddered violently. They were here. Lyra entered her final command for Stage 1. A green light flashed on her console. Alpha ready. 30 seconds remaining. Ramirez hit his confirmation. Beta ready. Soto was still typing, her lips moving silently as she recited the codes. One of the creature's claws, immense and black, punched through the heartwood door, metal screeching and tearing. 20 seconds remaining. Soto, Lyra urged, her voice tight. Soto's fingers danced over the interface. Gamma ready. All terminals confirmed, Veil Prime declared just as the timer hit 15 seconds. Stage 1 complete. Eden core synchronizing. Standby for Stage 2 initiation. The heartwood door buckled inward, ripped from its hinges by multiple monstrous claws. The first of the geode mine's elite guardians surged into the chamber. They were nothing like the amalgam butchers. These were sleek, agile killing machines, a horrifying fusion of chitinous armor, razor-sharp metallic limbs, and glowing, malevolent optics. They moved with terrifying speed and precision. Veil Prime's hologram flickered violently as one of the creatures passed through it. Stage 2, Data Purge and Power Severance. Initiating. Now, 60 seconds. The timer reset, its crimson glow illuminating the invading horrors. Lyra, Ramirez, and Soto turned back to their consoles, their hands flying, even as the first of the biomechanical nightmares bore down on them, their screeches deafening, their intent murderous. The final, desperate battle for Tartarus had begun, not with weapons, but with keystrokes against a ticking clock of oblivion. Chapter 11, 60 Seconds to Oblivion. The biomechanical guardian, a blur of black chitin and flashing silver limbs, lunged for Lyra at Terminal Alpha. Its multifaceted optics glowed with cold, predatory intelligence. Lyra didn't flinch, her fingers a blur on the console, entering the critical code sequence for the geode mine's data purge. The timer burned at 55 seconds. A blast of concentrated kinetic force, almost invisible save for a shimmer in the air, slammed into the Guardian's side. The creature shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and was thrown against the far wall, its chassis denting with a sickening crunch. It struggled to rise, limbs twitching. Veil Prime's hologram stood steady, one spectral hand outstretched. My apologies. Residual defensive subroutines within the heartwood, limited energy but occasionally effective. His image flickered. Focus on your tasks. Time is paramount. Another guardian, leaner and armed with whip-like energy tendrils, darted towards Doc Ramirez at Terminal Beta. Ramirez, his face a mask of concentration, didn't spare it a glance, his fingers methodically inputting the phased shutdown commands for the geothermal power taps. 48 seconds. The energy tendril lashed out. Soto, from Terminal Gamma, screamed a warning. Lyra risked a glance. The tendril was about to connect with Ramirez's exposed back. Suddenly, a section of the floor panel beneath the attacking Guardian glowed intensely, then erupted in a localized gravitic pulse. The creature was slammed upwards into the ceiling with bone-jarring force, then dropped, stunned and spasming. The heartwood defends its purpose, Veil Prime murmured, though his hologram wavered more noticeably this time. These defenses are drawing heavily on the Eden core's remaining power. They will not last. 40 seconds. Lyra refocused, her own console demanding her full attention. The data purge was intricate. One Mies-typed character could corrupt the entire sequence, rendering the protocol useless. The roars and screeches of more Guardians pressing into the chamber were a deafening backdrop to the relentless ticking of the holographic clock. A third Guardian, this one built for brute force, its chassis thick and heavily armored, charged towards Sodo at Terminal Gamma. Sodo, muttering the override codes under her breath, risked a desperate, upward jab with a heavy, metallic data stylus she'd found clipped to her console. The sharpened point, by sheer luck, found a microfissure in the Guardian's primary optic sensor. The creature bellowed in agony, its remaining optics flashing erratically. It swiped blindly, its massive claw tearing a chunk out of the console next to Sodo's, showering her with sparks and shrapnel. She cried out but held her ground, her fingers never ceasing their dance on the keyboard. 30 seconds. Lyra gritted her teeth, entering the final string of commands for her data purge. Alpha sequence complete, awaiting confirmation. Alpha confirmed, she yelled over the din. 25 seconds. Ramirez, sweat pouring down his face, slammed his palm onto his confirmation panel. Beta confirmed, power taps, shutting down. The lights in the Heartwood flickered violently, the ambient white glow dimming significantly. The remaining active Guardians faltered, their movements becoming slightly more sluggish as their primary power source began to dwindle. 18 seconds. Sodo was still typing, the damaged Guardian thrashing beside her, its flailing limbs a constant threat. Another Guardian, the first one Lyra had seen, the one Veil Prime had initially blasted, was back on its feet, its dented chassis sparking, and was now advancing on Sodo from her other side. Sodo now, Lyra screamed. Sodo's fingers hit the final key. Gamma sequence complete, awaiting confirmation. She slapped the panel. Gamma confirmed, secondary relays, overloading. 10 seconds remaining. All terminals confirmed for Stage 2, Veil Prime announced, his voice strained, his hologram now barely visible, shot through with static. Data purge initiated, power severance in progress, structural integrity of lower levels, beginning to destabilize, stand by for Stage 3, the final cascade. The Guardians in the room shrieked in unison, a sound of pure, electronic agony as their connection to the geode mine's vast network was forcibly severed, and their internal power cells began to drain without replenishment. They staggered, their movements becoming erratic, their optics dimming. One collapsed, then another. The Heartwood chamber plunged into near darkness as the main lights failed, save for the crimson emergency glow of the countdown timer and the faint, residual light from Veil Prime's fatting hologram. The floor bucked violently. Alarms, shrill and panicked, began to blare from the consoles, alarms that had been silent until this precise moment. Stage 3, Final Severance Cascade, Veil Prime's voice crackled, almost lost in the rising chaos. This is it. Input the master override codes. Unleash the event horizon. 60 seconds. The timer reset, its red numbers a beacon in the gloom. The remaining Guardians, though crippled, were still a threat. The one with the damaged optic lunged blindly towards Sodo. Lyra grabbed the heavy, crystalline datapad from its pedestal Veil's core. It was surprisingly weighty. With a desperate cry, she hurled it at the thrashing Guardian. The datapad struck the creature's head with a sickening crack. The Guardian crumpled, finally inert. The datapad shattered on the floor, its internal blue light extinguishing forever. "Consoles!" Lyra yelled, scrambling back to Terminal Alpha. The interface was barely visible in the emergency lighting. The air was thick with dust and the smell of burning electronics. The entire Heartwood structure groaned around them, the sound of immense pressures tearing it apart. 50 seconds. Lyra's hands found the keyboard, her mind racing to recall the final, critical override codes. They were simpler than the previous stages, a failsafe designed for speed in a crisis. A metallic screech from above. A section of the ceiling panel tore loose, and a new type of horror dropped into the chamber, not a guardian, but a glistening black tendril, impossibly long and tipped with a razor-sharp crystalline barb. The geode mined itself, or a direct extension of it, desperately trying to intervene. The tendril whipped towards Lyra. 40 seconds. Ramirez at Terminal Beta saw the danger. He grabbed the heavy metal stool he'd been sitting on earlier and with a roar of effort hurled it at the tendril. The stool intercepted the crystalline barb, deflecting it an instant before it would have impaled Lyra. The tendril recoiled, then struck again, shattering the stool and knocking Ramirez off his feet. He lay still. "Doc," Soto screamed. Lyra didn't look, she couldn't. Alpha override entered. Confirmed. 30 seconds. The tendril, now free, arced towards Soto at Terminal Gamma. Soto, tears streaming down her face, kept typing, her eyes fixed on her screen. "SOTO, move," Lyra shrieked. Soto hit her final confirmation key just as the crystalline barb plunged downwards. Gamma override entered. Confirmed. The barb struck not Soto but the console of Terminal Gamma. Sparks erupted. The console exploded, throwing Soto clear across the chamber. She landed in a heap, unmoving. 20 seconds. Only Lyra remained. Ramirez and Soto were down. Her own terminal was confirmed, but the protocol required all three. She scrambled towards Terminal Beta where Ramirez lay. The tendril was retracting, preparing for another strike. Ramirez groaned, stirring. "Lyra, finish it." His hand, bloody and shaking, was still reaching for his console. Lyra knelt beside him, guiding his fingers to the confirmation panel. He pressed it weakly. "Beta override entered. Confirmed." 10 seconds. The timer blazed. "All overrides. Confirmed," Veil Prime's voice whispered, his hologram now a barely perceptible shimmer of static. "Event Horizon Protocol, fully initiated. The cascade is irreversible. Tartarus will be severed." His image vanished completely. A profound, bone-jarring silence descended, more terrifying than the preceding chaos. The emergency lights died. The timer vanished. They were plunged into absolute darkness, and a silence so deep it felt like the end of the world. Then a low, subsonic hum began, vibrating through the very foundations of the Heartwood. It grew rapidly in intensity, becoming a physical pressure, a tearing force. The floor beneath Lyra bucked and split. Cracks spiderwebbed across the walls. The entire structure of Chiron Vale's sanctuary was disintegrating around them. Lyra closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. She had done it. They had done it, but the price. The severance, the amputation of level 9 and below. The heartwood, the epicenter of the protocol, was being torn apart, atom by atom, caught in the backlash of its own terrible, world-shattering power. There would be no survival here. This was oblivion. Chapter 12. The Weight of Silence. Darkness, utter and complete. The tearing vibrational forces ceased as abruptly as they had begun. Lyra drifted in a void, unsure if she was alive or dead, conscious or merely an echo. There was no sound, no light, no sensation of up or down. Only a profound, crushing silence and the lingering metallic taste of ozone and fear. Slowly, sensation returned. A dull ache in her head, the grit of dust and pulverized concrete beneath her cheek, the smell of cold stone and something else, something like the aftermath of a colossal electrical discharge. She coughed, a dry, racking sound that seemed deafening in the stillness. Her limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. With immense effort, she pushed herself up, her hands scraping against rough, broken rock. Her small LED keychain light. It was still clipped to her belt. Her fingers, clumsy and shaking, fumbled for it. With a click, a pathetically weak beam cut through the oppressive black. She was in a ruin. The heartwood chamber was gone, utterly obliterated. Jagged shards of metal, remnants of the sophisticated consoles, jutted from heaps of rubble. The walls were raw, broken rock, as if the very earth had been violently reshaped. Above, where the ceiling had been, was only more darkness, hinting at a vast, empty space. Panic, cold and familiar, began to rise, but it was blunted by an overwhelming exhaustion, a sense of finality. Doc Soto. Her voice was a hoarse whisper, absorbed by the silent devastation. She swept the weak beam of light around. Near a twisted piece of what might have been terminal beta, she saw a form, Doc Ramirez. He was partially buried under a slab of fallen rock, his limbs at unnatural angles. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the unseen roof of this new, terrible cavern. No breath stirred his chest. Lyra's throat constricted. She reached out a trembling hand, touching his cold cheek. "Oh, Doc." Further away, near a pile of smoking, fused metal that was once terminal gamma, lay Soto. Her small form was still, covered in a thick layer of dust like a hastily made burial shroud. Lyra crawled towards her, her heart a leaden weight. Soto's face was peaceful, almost childlike, but there was no sign of life. She was alone, the sole survivor of the Event Horizon Protocol. The silence of this place was the silence of their sacrifice. She sat back against a jagged rock, the LED beam falling on the destruction around her. The air was surprisingly breathable, though cold and thin. The geode mind. Was it gone? Was Tartarus truly severed? Or had they merely bought a temporary reprieve, unleashing some new, unforeseen horror in the process? The protocol was designed to entomb the lower levels. This chamber, the epicenter, should have been atomized. Why was she still here? Still alive? Had some unforeseen quirk of the cascading energies shielded this small pocket? Or was this some new, crueler kind of trap? A faint sound reached her, cutting through the silence. A whisper. Not the insidious mental chorus of level 9, nor the sorrowful sighs of the lost choir. This was different, fainter, almost curious. Alive. Lyra froze, her blood running cold. The beam of her LED darted around the cavern, but there was nothing, only shadows and ruin. Unexpected, a fragment remains. The voice was not in her head. It was in the air like the faintest of breezes, yet it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was ancient, vast, and utterly alien. What are you? Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. I am the silence between the thoughts, the echo in the deep stone. You call me Tartarus. Not the geode mind. This was something else, something older. The something ancient that Veridian had said Omni-Corp had disturbed in the deep rock, the entity the geode mind itself had perhaps been built upon or had tried to consume. Had the Event Horizon Protocol in severing the geode mind inadvertently awakened this or freed it? The noisy child is silenced, its web unraveled. The whisper continued, a hint of something that might have been satisfaction if such a vast consciousness could feel it. But you resonate with the severance, a spark in the ash. Lyra felt a profound existential dread. She had faced monsters, conspiracies, impossible choices, but this was beyond her comprehension. A planetary consciousness, a geological sentience. What do you want? She managed, her throat dry. To observe the patterns, the echoes. You are an anomaly, little spark, a survivor of a rending. Such things are interesting. The beam of her LED flickered, then died, its battery finally exhausted. She was plunged back into absolute darkness. But the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the immense, ancient presence of Tartarus itself, observing her, a tiny, fragile survivor in its unfathomable depths. She didn't know how long she sat there, lost in the dark, the cold, and the weight of that silent, observing presence. Hours, days. Time had lost all meaning. Hunger gnawed at her, thirst parched her throat, but these physical discomforts were dwarfed by the psychological immensity of her situation. Then another sound, faint, distant, but unmistakable, the scrape of metal on rock, the click of machinery, and voices, human voices, not whispers but actual spoken words distorted by distance and acoustics but undeniably real. Hope, or perhaps a new kind of fear, surged through her. Had someone from the upper levels detected the protocol? Were they sending rescue teams? Or were these something else? Scavengers, or agents of a part of Omni-Corp that had survived, coming to assess the damage, to salvage what they could from Vale's folly. She had to know. She had to move, even if it meant stepping out of this pocket of ruin and into a new, unknown danger. Anything was better than remaining here, alone in the dark with the silent, observing consciousness of the deep earth. Using the faint, residual afterimages in her vision, she began to feel her way through the rubble, towards the direction of those distant, tantalizing, terrifying sounds of human activity. Chapter 13. The Scavengers of the Severance. Lyra moved through the darkness like a phantom, her hands outstretched, her senses straining. The rubble of the Heartwood chamber gave way to a narrow, jagged fissure in the rock, a new tunnel, violently carved by the Event Horizon Protocol. The sounds of activity grew clearer. The rhythmic clang of tools, the hiss of pneumatic lifts, the clipped, professional tones of voices giving orders. She emerged from the fissure into a scene of controlled chaos. Powerful floodlights, stark and utilitarian, illuminated a vast, newly formed cavern. This was not the sylvan quiet of Vale's Eden. This was a raw, open wound in the earth. And crawling over it like industrious insects were figures in heavy-duty environmental suits, their helmet lights cutting swathes through the gloom. Omnicorp, or what was left of it. They were using heavy machinery to clear debris, taking core samples, setting up sensor arrays. A makeshift command center, a cluster of interconnected inflatable habitats, pulsed with internal light near one wall of the cavern. This was no rescue mission. This was a salvage operation, a scientific gold rush. Lyra pressed herself into the shadows of the fissure, her heart pounding. These were not friends. These were the people whose predecessors had twisted Vale's work, who had unleashed the geode mind. What would they do to a survivor who knew the truth, who had been instrumental in the protocol that had caused this? Opportunity. She recognized the insignia on their suits. Omnicorp Advanced Research and Containment OARC, the company's most secretive and reportedly most ruthless division. A figure in a slightly different colored envirosuit, perhaps a supervisor, was addressing a group near the command center. Lyra strained to hear over the din of machinery. Preliminary scans indicate significant energy signatures consistent with the Vale Singularity event. Level 9 and below are gone, completely excised from the facility's primary energy matrix. The theoretical severance line appears stable for now. The supervisor's voice was amplified, metallic. Our priority is to assess the nature of the new strata. The exposed geothermal vents are emitting exotic particles we've never cataloged, and the deep-level energy readings. They're off the charts but quiescent, as if something vast just exhaled. Lyra shivered. The something vast that had exhaled was Tartarus itself, the ancient consciousness whose whispers she had heard. OARC was here to poke it with a stick. We've also detected residual biosignatures, the supervisor continued. Extremophile remnants mostly, but the Vale Singularity, it appears to have had a sterilizing effect on most of the known Tartarus xenomorphs in this immediate vicinity. However, new, unclassified life forms are already emerging from the deeper vents. Caution is paramount. No mention of human survivors from the lower levels. They likely assumed none could have made it through the protocol's activation. Lyra was an impossibility, a ghost in their calculations. She needed to get out of here. But how? This cavern was a hub of activity. Every potential exit would be monitored. Her gaze fell on a convoy of automated transport sleds being loaded with equipment and samples near a newly bored access tunnel, clearly leading upwards. If she could somehow stow away. It was a desperate, reckless idea. But staying here meant eventual discovery, and discovery by OARC was unlikely to end well. She waited, observing their routines, the shift changes, the patterns of the automated sleds. The hunger and thirst were becoming debilitating. Her strength was failing. She had to act soon. During a brief lull, as one OARC team rotated out and another prepared to deploy, Lyra saw her chance. A supply sled, loaded with empty sample containers and discarded equipment, was parked temporarily in a shadowed alcove near her fissure, awaiting its automated return to the upper levels. Taking a deep, ragged breath, she slipped from the fissure, moving as silently as her weakened state allowed. Every shadow was a potential enemy, every sound a threat. She reached the sled, her heart hammering against her ribs. The containers were large, hollow. She managed to pry one open, a biohazard canister, thankfully empty, and squeezed herself inside, pulling the lid partially closed, leaving only a tiny gap for air. The darkness inside the canister was absolute, suffocating. It smelled faintly of chemical sterilizers. She curled into a fetal position, trying to control her breathing, her fear. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, with a soft whir, the sled began to move. It glided smoothly out of the alcove, joining the convoy heading for the access tunnel. Lyra held her breath, praying no one would inspect the cargo too closely. The journey upwards was a blur of jolts, vibrations, and the muffled sounds of the facility. She had no idea how long it took. Hours, perhaps. The air in the canister grew stale, hot. Panic clawed at her, the claustrophobia almost unbearable. She focused on the image of Doc Ramirez's sacrifice, of Soto's bravery, of Rex's defiant roar. She owed it to them to survive, to ensure their story wasn't buried with the ruins of Level 9. Finally, the sled shuddered to a halt. The ambient sounds changed, the hiss of climate control, the distant hum of a fully powered, functioning facility. She heard voices, closer now, unmuffled by envirosuits. This load goes to Decon Gamma, then to Analysis Bay 7. Standard Level 4 bioprotocols in effect. Level 4. She was out of the severance zone, but still deep within Tartarus and deep within Omnicorp's grasp. The canister was lifted, moved. She was jostled, tilted. She heard the hiss of an airlock. Then she was set down hard, more voices, the clatter of equipment. She waited, every nerve screaming, until the sounds receded, until she judged it was safe, or as safe as it was going to get. With trembling hands, she pushed the lid of the canister open a crack. She was in a brightly lit, sterile laboratory. Decontamination showers lined one wall. Autoclaves hummed. Rows of empty analysis stations awaited samples. This was clearly a receiving area for materials coming up from the newly accessible deep levels. And it was, for the moment, empty. Lyra crawled out of the canister, her limbs stiff and aching. She was filthy, exhausted, starving, but alive. She needed to find a way out of this lab, a way to blend in, to access a communications terminal to contact someone. But who? Who could she trust in a facility run by Omnicorp, a corporation that had, by negligence or design, unleashed such horrors? Her eyes fell on a standard Omnicorp datapad charging in a cradle on one of the benches. Not as advanced as Vale's crystalline device, but functional, if she could access the network. But as she reached for it, a door on the far side of the lab slid open. A figure in a pristine white Omnicorp lab coat, an OARC insignia on the sleeve, stepped in. The scientist, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and an expression of cool detachment, paused, her gaze falling on Lyra. There was a moment of stunned silence. The scientist's eyes widened, not with alarm, but with a flicker of recognition. Or was it something else? Something calculating? Well, well, the OARC scientist said, her voice devoid of surprise as if she'd been expecting an anomaly. It seems one of Dr. Vale's echoes has found its way home. Subject Lyra Chen, I presume. Your survival is statistically improbable and highly inconvenient. She raised a hand, not in alarm, but to tap a comm link on her wrist. Security to Decon Gamma. We have an unauthorized specimen. Handle with care. She might be informative. Lyra's heart sank. Out of the frying pan, into the fire. Her desperate escape had led her straight into the hands of Omni Corp's most dangerous division. Chapter 14. The Interrogation Chamber. The OARC security team was brutally efficient. No questions, no explanations. Just firm hands, stun prods held ready, and an unnerving silence as they escorted Lyra from Decon Gamma. She was too weak to resist, her brief flicker of hope extinguished. They didn't take her to a standard holding cell. Instead, she found herself in a small, windowless room, furnished with only a single bolted-down chair and a mirrored wall. An interrogation chamber, stark and clinical. The air was cool, sterile, and carried the faint, almost subliminal hum of sophisticated surveillance equipment. After what felt like an age, the door slid open and the OARC scientist from Decon Gamma entered. She carried a data pad. Her expression was still one of cool, professional detachment, but her eyes held a predatory gleam. Lyra Chen, she began, her voice even. I am Dr. Aris Thorne, Director of Xenomorphic Adaptation Studies for OARC. A rather dull title, I admit, for work that is anything but. She didn't offer Lyra a seat, though Lyra doubted her legs would hold her much longer. Thorne remained standing, circling Lyra slowly, like a biologist observing a particularly interesting insect. Your presence here is a puzzle, Thorne continued. The Event Horizon Protocol, as per Vale's fragmented projections, should have resulted in total annihilation within the activation zone. Yet here you are. Explain. Lyra remained silent, her throat dry, her mind racing. Thorne was fishing. She didn't know the full extent of what had happened, only that Lyra had survived the impossible. Thorne sighed, a theatrical display of impatience. Look, Miss Chen, we can do this the easy way or the OARC way. I assure you, the latter is considerably less pleasant and significantly more time-consuming for everyone involved. We have persuasive methods for extracting information, methods that bypass conscious resistance quite effectively. Lyra thought of the puppet master spores, of the lost choir's psychic assault. Omni Corp, in its various guises, had a talent for such things. What do you want to know? Lyra finally rasped. A thin smile touched Thorne's lips. Ah, a pragmatist. Good. Let's start with the protocol itself. Vale's theoretical framework was ambitious. Did it function as designed? Was the geode mind neutralized, or merely inconvenienced? It was, Severed, Lyra said, choosing her words carefully. From the facility's power and data networks, level 9 and below, they're gone. So our initial scans suggest, Thorne acknowledged. A neat amputation. But what of the entity itself? Did you encounter it? Did Vale's protocol destroy its core consciousness? Lyra hesitated, the geode mind, and then the ancient, vaster consciousness of Tartarus itself. How much should she reveal? How much could Thorne even comprehend? The primary entity, the one Vale called the geode mind, I believe it was, contained, or crippled, Lyra said. She decided to omit for now her encounter with the deeper sentience. OARC was dangerous enough without giving them clues about an even greater power to exploit. Thorne's eyes narrowed. Contained, crippled, not destroyed, interesting semantics. She made a note on her data pad. And your companions. Records indicate a Dr. Ernesto Ramirez and an engineering intern, Payasoto, were with you when you breached level 9's. Sanctuary. Where are they? Lyra's gaze dropped to the floor. The faces of Doc Ramirez and Soto, pale and still in the ruins of the Heartwood, flashed in her mind. They didn't make it. Casualties of the protocol's activation, Thorne pressed, or something else. They sacrificed themselves, Lyra said, a tremor in her voice, to ensure the protocol was completed. Heroics, Thorne mused almost contemptuously. So inefficient, and Dr. Kyron Vale, his persistent personality matrix, was it instrumental in this heroic sacrifice? He guided us, Lyra admitted. His knowledge was essential. Thorne paced, her heels clicking on the sterile floor. Vale was a visionary, certainly, but sentimental. His ethical subroutines were a hindrance to true progress. His Eden project, quaint. OmniCorp's vision for Project Sanctuary, leveraging the geode mind as an organic superprocessor, was far more ambitious. A pity it became unstable. She paused, her gaze sharp. Unless its instability was deliberately accelerated. Perhaps by Vale himself, setting the stage for his dramatic protocol. Lyra saw the trap. Thorne was trying to paint Vale as a saboteur, to justify OmniCorp's actions, perhaps even to frame Lyra as an accomplice if she defended him too vehemently. Dr. Vale wanted to protect Tartarus, Lyra stated simply. The geode mind was out of control. The protocol was a last resort. A last resort that has, conveniently for OARC, exposed unprecedented geothermal energy sources and novel extremophilic life forms in the severance zone, Thorne countered smoothly. Every crisis is an opportunity, Miss Chen. Vale's catastrophe might well be OmniCorp's greatest breakthrough. The cynicism was breathtaking. The deaths, the horror, the sacrifice, all reduced to a resource acquisition opportunity. And you, Lyra Chen, Thorne said, stopping directly in front of her. The sole survivor, immune perhaps to energies that should have vaporized you, or perhaps changed by them. What happened in those final moments after the protocol's activation? How did you survive when the architects of your salvation perished? This was the crux of it, her improbable survival. Lyra thought of the whispers of Tartarus. You resonate with the severance, a spark in the ash. She couldn't tell Thorne that. It would make her a target of even more intense and likely agonizing OARC scrutiny. I don't know, Lyra said, feigning confusion, exhaustion. There was an energy backlash. I was thrown clear when I woke up. I was alone. The chamber was destroyed. It was a partial truth, but the best she could manage. Thorne studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Perhaps, or perhaps there's more to your resonance than simple luck. She tapped her data pad again. You will remain here, Miss Chen, under observation. We will conduct a full medical and psychological evaluation. We need to understand your unique resilience. It could be valuable. The implication was clear. Lyra was no longer a person, merely a specimen, a resource to be analyzed, exploited, perhaps dissected, all in the name of OARC's relentless pursuit of knowledge and power. The door slid open, and two more OARC personnel, these ones in medical scrubs but with the same hard eyes as the security team, entered. They carried a tray of ominous-looking instruments. "Cooperate, Miss Chen," Thorne said, her voice a silken threat. "It will make the process smoother for all of us. We have so much to learn from you." Lyra's mind raced. She was trapped, weakened, facing Omnicorp's most ruthless scientists. But she still had one thing they didn't fully comprehend: her connection, however faint, however terrifying, to the ancient consciousness of Tartarus itself. And within that connection, perhaps, lay her only desperate chance. Not for escape necessarily, but for something else, for a reckoning. Chapter 15: Whispers of Retribution. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of tests, scans, and interrogations in the sterile confines of the OARC wing. Lyra was a prisoner, a lab rat. Thorne's medical and psychological evaluations were thinly veiled attempts to understand her improbable survival, to quantify the resonance the ancient Tartarus consciousness had spoken of. They drew blood, scanned her brain activity, subjected her to disorienting sensory experiences, always observing, always recording. Lyra cooperated on the surface, answering questions with carefully constructed partial truths, feigning exhaustion and trauma to mask her inner turmoil. But in the quiet moments, in the sterile darkness of her observation cell, she focused. She reached out with her mind, not to the shattered remnants of Vale's echo, but deeper, into the cold stone of the facility, trying to find that vast, silent presence again. At first, there was nothing. Only the hum of the facility, the distant thrum of machinery. She wondered if her brief contact had been a hallucination, a product of shock and oxygen deprivation in the ruins of the Heartwood. Then slowly, subtly, it returned. Not as a voice, not yet, but as a feeling. A vast, cold awareness, an ancient patience. It was listening. The spark persists. The whisper was fainter now, more diffuse, as if filtered through miles of rock and Omnicorp interference. Lyra focused, sending out her own silent plea. They are like the geode mind. They will exploit, they will destroy. They don't understand the balance. There was no immediate response, only that immense, passive observation. Lyra began to despair. What could she, a single, captive human, do against the might of Omnicorp? What could even a planetary consciousness do if it chose not to act? Thorne's interrogations grew more intense. She was particularly interested in the final moments of the protocol, in any unusual energy signatures Lyra might have perceived. She suspected Lyra was withholding something. "Your cellular regeneration is anomalous, Miss Chen," Thorne said one day, reviewing a datapad with Lyra's latest medical scans. "Minor abrasions from your ordeal healed at a rate far exceeding normal parameters. There are subtle alterations in your mitochondrial energy output. The Veil singularity didn't just spare you, it changed you." Lyra felt a chill she hadn't noticed, but Thorne's machines missed nothing. "The severance leaves traces. You are attuned to the deep energies now." The ancient whisper confirmed in her mind a cold comfort. That night, as Lyra lay on the hard cot in her cell, a new wave of tremors shook the facility. Not the violent, tearing jolts of the Event Horizon Protocol, but a series of deep, resonant pulses, like a colossal heart beating far below. The emergency lights flickered. Alarms, distant but insistent, began to sound in other sections of Tartarus. In her mind, the whisper of Tartarus grew stronger, clearer. "The little diggers grow too bold. They disturb the deep nests, where the old ones sleep." "Old ones," Lyra whispered aloud in the darkness. Before me, before the stone cooled, they dreamt. The geode mind was but a noisy infant plucking at their slumber." A new, terrifying understanding dawned on Lyra. The geode mind wasn't the deepest horror Tartarus held. Omnicorp, in their frenzied exploitation of the severance zone, was drilling deeper, awakening things that made the geode mind look like a household pest. Things the ancient Tartarus consciousness itself seemed wary of. The tremors intensified. A guttural roar, far deeper and more powerful than any amalgam butcher or biomechanical guardian, echoed up from the bowels of the facility. It was a sound that spoke of continental pressures, of eons of slumber disturbed. Thorne burst into Lyra's cell, her usual composure shattered. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes wide with a fear Lyra had never thought to see in the OARC director. "What is happening?" Thorne demanded, grabbing Lyra's arm. "The severance line. It's destabilizing. Energy readings from below. They're impossible. Did Vale's protocol have unforeseen consequences?" Lyra looked at Thorne, and for the first time she felt something other than fear or resignation. A cold, hard resolve. "You dug too deep, Doctor," Lyra said, her voice even. "You always dig too deep." The whisper of Tartarus filled Lyra's mind, no longer passive but imbued with a chilling, elemental fury. The balance must be restored. The noisy children, above and below, will learn silence. "What are you talking about?" Thorne shrieked, as a particularly violent tremor threw them both against the wall. "What balance?" Lyra closed her eyes, focusing on the ancient consciousness, on her own strange attunement to the deep energies. She didn't know what she was doing, only that she had to try. She reached out, not with a plea, but with an offering of her own resonant energy, her own spark, as a conduit, a focusing lens for the immense, raw power of Tartarus itself. And yes, little spark, show them the true depth of this world. The floor of the cell cracked, the walls groaned, the lights exploded in a shower of sparks. From far below, a wave of unimaginable energy surged upwards, not the chaotic destruction of the event horizon, but something older, more purposeful, a planetary immune response. Lyra felt it pass through her, a torrent of cold, ancient power that resonated with the changes within her own cells. It was an agony, an ecstasy, a terrifying expansion of consciousness. She saw, for a fleeting instant, the vast, interconnected web of life and energy that was Tartarus, from its deepest core to its highest peaks, a complex breathing entity. And she saw Omnicorp's frantic, futile attempts to contain what they had unleashed. The OARC wing was tearing itself apart. The upper levels of Tartarus, once a beacon of scientific hubris, were now facing a reckoning from the true, primordial forces they had so arrogantly sought to master. When Lyra opened her eyes, Thorn was gone, presumably fled or consumed by the chaos. Her cell was a ruin, open to a corridor that was itself collapsing. The sounds of destruction were everywhere, mixed with human screams and the roars of things that had no name. This was not salvation. This was retribution, a cleansing fire from the heart of the world. Lyra Chen, the improbable survivor, the resonant spark, stood amidst the ruins of Omnicorp's ambition, changed, terrified, but strangely at peace. The noisy children were being silenced. The balance, in its own terrible, elemental way, was being restored. What would rise from the ashes of Tartarus, she did not know. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the age of human mastery over this deep, ancient world was over. The whispers of the earth had finally spoken, and their voice was an earthquake, their pronouncement oblivion. The true horror of Tartarus was not its monsters, but its sheer, indifferent, and now awakened immensity. Chapter 16: The Recalibrated World. Consciousness returned to Lyra not as a gentle dawn, but as a cold, sharp clarity, like surfacing from an abyssal dive into air too thin, too pure. The raging energies had subsided. The cacophony of Tartarus tearing itself apart was replaced by a silence so profound it pressed upon her eardrums, a silence that felt older and more absolute than any she had known. She lay on a bed of what felt like cooling rock. The dust of pulverized concrete and metal settled over her like a macabre shroud. Her body ached with a deep, resonant thrum, as if every cell had been vibrated, retuned. But it wasn't pain, not entirely. It was awareness, a heightened, almost uncomfortable sensitivity to the world around her. Opening her eyes, she saw not the immediate devastation of her former cell, but a vast, open space. The OARC wing, the upper levels of Tartarus she had briefly glimpsed, were largely gone, sheared away, or collapsed into chasms that plunged into an unseen, lightless abyss. Above, where a reinforced ceiling should have been, was a jagged wound opening to something else. It wasn't the sky. It was a swirling, nebulous canvas of faint, deep-spectrum light, colors she had no names for, as if the planet's mantle itself had been peeled back in places. She sat up. Her clothes were shredded, caked with grime, but her skin beneath felt different, smoother, cooler to the touch, with a faint, almost imperceptible luminescence in the dim, otherworldly light. The minor cuts and abrasions she'd sustained were gone, not healed in the normal sense, but simply no longer there. Thorne's observations about her cellular regeneration had been an understatement. The attunement, the resonance, had accelerated, amplified by the planetary energies she had channeled. A faint whisper like wind through impossibly ancient caverns brushed against her mind. The great agitation settles, the skin of the world breathes anew. It was Tartarus Prime, the ancient consciousness of the planet. Its voice was calmer now, the fury of its retribution spent, leaving behind a vast, contemplative quiet. What happened? Lyra whispered, her own voice sounding alien in this transformed space. A recalibration, the parasitic growths, excised, the deeper fevers, momentarily cooled. Lyra rose, her movements feeling more fluid, stronger than before. She looked at her hands. They seemed to glow faintly with their own internal light, the skin almost translucent. She felt no hunger, no thirst, only this strange, vibrant new energy coursing through her. She began to explore cautiously. The familiar architecture of Tartarus was almost entirely gone in this section. Walls of rock, glowing with strange mineral veins, had replaced plasteel corridors. New flora, unlike anything even Vale had cultivated, sprouted from crevices, a crystalline fungi that pulsed with soft light, vines like spun glass that chimed faintly in unseen air currents. The air itself was different, charged with exotic particles, carrying scents she couldn't identify, some metallic, some like ozone, some like the rich, damp smell of primordial earth. This wasn't just destruction, it was transformation, a violent, accelerated terraforming from within. She found remnants of Omnicorp, a melted datapad, a twisted structural beam, a discarded envirosuit helmet, its visor shattered, half buried in newly formed rock. There were no bodies, no signs of Thorne or the other OARC personnel, consumed, atomized, or simply unmade. As she moved through this alien landscape that had once been a cutting-edge research facility, Lyra felt a new sensation, a deep, rhythmic pulsing from far, far below. It was not the steady, ancient thrum of Tartarus Prime. This was slower, heavier, like the breathing of colossal entities stirring from an eon-long slumber. The old ones. Tartarus Prime's whisper returned, a note of something Lyra had not heard from it before, a subtle undercurrent that might have been concern, or perhaps ancient, ingrained caution. Their sleep, always light, was disturbed by the geode mind's thrashing, and now, by the recalibration, they stir more profoundly. Are they, like you? Lyra asked, her mind struggling to comprehend scales of existence so far beyond human understanding. I am the world skin, the matrix, the slow thought of the stone and the fire. They are the first tenets, the deep heart kernels, before the crust cooled and life as you know it began its dance. Their awakening is a different kind of change. Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. The geode mind had been a nightmare of corrupted intelligence and biological horror. Omnicorp, a plague of avarice and hubris. But these old ones, they sounded like something elemental, something foundational, whose mere stirring could unravel realities. She came to a precipice, a sheer drop into a chasm so deep the strange, ambient light from above could not penetrate its depths. But from that abyss, she felt the ponderous, rhythmic pulse of the old ones more strongly, and with it, a new kind of whisper began to intrude upon her senses. Not the planetary voice of Tartarus Prime, but something else. Many voices, yet one. Ancient, powerful, and utterly, terrifyingly alien to any form of consciousness she could conceive. These were not thoughts in any human sense, but raw, primordial concepts. Hunger, void, endless cycles of creation and uncreation, patterns of existence that defied logic. They perceive your spark, your altered resonance. Tartarus Prime's whisper was now a tight beam in her mind, urgent. They are curious, and their curiosity is seldom benign. The balance achieved by the recalibration is fragile. Their full awakening would shatter it, would unmake more than just the noisy children. A new imperative settled upon Lyra, not a command from Tartarus Prime, but a dawning, horrifying realization born of her own attunement. The retribution hadn't been an end. It had been the violent prelude to a new, and perhaps far greater horror. The noisy children had been silenced, yes, but in their place, the silent, dreaming ancients were beginning to stir. And Lyra Chen, the resonant spark, the survivor changed by planetary fire, found herself standing on the precipice of an abyss, the unwilling intermediary between the skin of the world and its deepest, most primordial heart. The recalibrated world was not a peaceful one. It was a world holding its breath, waiting for the true ancients to fully open their eyes. And their gaze, Lyra sensed, was already turning towards her. Chapter 17. The Bloom of Abyssal Life. Days, or perhaps cycles defined by the shifting, otherworldly light from the torn sky ceiling, passed as Lyra navigated the transformed ruins of Upper Tartarus. Her new senses were a constant barrage. The subtle electromagnetic fluxes from the exposed mantle, the infrasonic vibrations of the planet's core, the complex pheromonal signals of the new crystalline flora, and the bizarre insectoid fauna that had begun to emerge from the deeper fissures. She moved with a grace and certainty that was not entirely her own, her body instinctively attuned to the rhythms of this new, wild Tartarus. Tartarus Prime's consciousness was a constant, subtle presence, a vast, cool awareness that observed her, guided her at times with faint impressions, but rarely interfered directly. It was as if Lyra were a particularly interesting, mobile sensory organ for the planetary sentience. The pulsing from the abyss, the signature of the stirring old ones, grew stronger, more defined with each cycle, and with it the unsettling alien whispers, those raw conceptual transmissions, became more intrusive, probing at the edges of Lyra's mind. She learned to build mental shields, drawing on her own augmented willpower and the faint, protective resonance of Tartarus Prime, but it was exhausting. The old one's curiosity felt like a mountain leaning against a pane of glass. One cycle, as she explored a vast, newly formed cavern that might once have been a series of research laboratories or residential blocks, she encountered something new. The floor of the cavern was split by a wide, steaming fissure, a direct conduit to the deeper levels. And from this fissure, things were emerging. Not the biomechanical horrors of the geode mind, nor the cobbled-together amalgam butchers. These were different. They were life forms of impossible geometry and alien biology, seemingly born from the abyss itself. Some were like colossal, translucent amoebas, their bodies shot through with veins of molten rock, dragging themselves across the cavern floor, leaving trails of rapidly cooling obsidian. Others were vast, floating gas bags, their skin shimmering with captured starlight from the torn sky ceiling, trailing delicate, miles-long tendrils that tasted the air with an unnerving intelligence. Still others were crystalline entities, all sharp angles and refracted light, that moved with a slow, grinding inevitability, their passage altering the very mineral structure of the rock around them. This was the bloom of abyssal life, the heralds or perhaps the pets of the old ones, now venturing into the upper, recalibrated zones. Lyra watched from a high ledge, her altered senses overwhelmed. These creatures were not inherently malevolent in the way the geode mind's creations had been. They simply were vast, ancient, operating on principles utterly alien to surface life. But their mere presence was an existential threat. The translucent amoeboid beings consumed rock and metal indiscriminately, excreting a rapidly hardening, obsidian-like substance that was sealing off sections of the cavern. The floating gas bags emitted subtle, high-frequency vibrations that resonated with the crystalline flora, causing it to shatter explosively. The crystalline entities seemed to be recruiting the native rock, transforming it into extensions of themselves. This wasn't an invasion. It was an ecological succession on a terrifying geological timescale, driven by forces from the planet's primordial core. The deep currents stir the silt, Tartarus Prime whispered in Lyra's mind, its tone still one of immense, ancient calm, yet underscored by that subtle urgency. The first tenants reshape their domain. Their patterns are not our patterns. They're destroying what you just recalibrated, Lyra thought back, a sense of frustration, of futility washing over her. Had all the sacrifice, the horror, been for nothing, merely to trade one apocalypse for another, even grander one? Destruction and creation are but phases of their breath, Tartarus Prime responded, but the skin of the world, this current iteration of life, it is thin, fragile, it requires a gentler gardener than they. A new understanding began to dawn on Lyra. Tartarus Prime was not all-powerful. It was ancient, vast, the consciousness of the planet's crust and mantle, but even it was subject to the deeper, more fundamental forces of the old ones who resided in the core. The recalibration had been a desperate act to remove a dangerous parasite omnicorp in the geode mind, but it had also inadvertently weakened the barriers, however metaphorical, that kept the influence of the old ones in check. As Lyra watched, one of the crystalline entities, a towering spire of jagged, obsidian-like facets, began to grow towards a massive, intact geothermal vent, one of the primary energy sources for what remained of the Upper Tartarus facility, and by extension, a key nexus for Tartarus Prime's own distributed consciousness. If the entity assimilated the vent, it could potentially disrupt or even co-opt a significant portion of Tartarus Prime's energy. That nexus must be preserved. Tartarus Prime's whisper was sharp, focused. Their bloom must be pruned, guided. Guided how? Lyra projected. She was one altered human. These things were continental forces made manifest. You resonate, little spark. Your attunement is a key. Their minds are not like the noisy child's. They do not understand deceit or malice, but they respond to fundamental frequencies, to patterns of resonance. Lyra looked at the advancing crystalline spire. It moved with a slow, implacable rhythm, its growth accompanied by a low, grinding hum that she could feel in her bones. The hum was a pattern, a frequency. Could she disrupt it or alter it? Her own body thrummed with the deep energy she had channeled. She was, in a way, a living tuning fork for the planet's song. Hesitantly, Lyra focused her will, her own internal resonance. She tried to match the grinding hum of the crystalline entity. Then, drawing on a memory of Vale's disruptive data screeches, she attempted to introduce a discordant note, a counter-frequency, into her own projected energy. It was like trying to divert a glacier with a whisper. But as she poured her will, her unique energy, into the effort, she felt something shift. The grinding hum of the crystalline spire faltered, its inexorable advance stuttering. The facets of its structure seemed to shimmer, to lose cohesion for a moment. It paused, confused, its alien intelligence encountering a pattern it did not recognize, a dissonance in the song of the deep earth. Lyra pressed her advantage, pouring more of her focused, discordant energy towards it. The spire began to slowly, almost reluctantly, retract from the geothermal vent. It didn't shatter, it didn't flee. It simply altered its path, its growth now veering away from the nexus, towards a less critical area of the cavern. She had done it. She had, in some small way, pruned the bloom. The effort left her shaking, drained, despite her augmented physiology. But a new, terrifying, and perhaps empowering understanding settled upon her. Tartarus Prime couldn't directly oppose the Old Ones or their abyssal progeny. But Lyra, the resonant spark, perhaps could. She was not a warrior. She was an intermediary, a tuner, a living harmonizer or disharmonizer in a symphony of geological and cosmic horrors. Her role in this new, recalibrated world was becoming terrifyingly clear. She was the unlikely gardener at the edge of an abyss, tasked with tending a fragile planetary skin against the encroaching bloom of its own primordial, alien heart. And the Old Ones, she sensed, were now more curious about this disruptive little spark than ever. Chapter 18: The Call from the Core. The abatement of the crystalline spire's advance was a small victory, but it brought Lyra no peace. The probing curiosity of the Old Ones intensified, shifting from a general, diffuse awareness of her presence to a more focused, almost gravitational pull. It was as if her act of pruning had flagged her as something significant, something to be investigated more closely. The alien whispers in her mind grew more insistent, no longer just abstract concepts but coalescing into complex, geometric thought patterns that strained her augmented comprehension. They were not hostile, not yet, but they were overwhelmingly powerful, demanding her attention, her participation. The pattern singer, the echo shaper, the chorus of the Old Ones seemed to resonate directly within her skull, bypassing her usual mental defenses. Your frequency is novel. Come closer. Let us examine the weave. No, Lyra projected back, a tremor of fear running through her. I will not be your specimen. A wave of what could only be described as colossal, ancient amusement washed over her. All threads are part of the greater tapestry, even the defiant ones. But your thread, it vibrates with the song of the unmaking and the remaking, a rare tone. Lyra retreated from the chasm where the abyssal life bloomed, moving back towards the more stable, a relative term now, regions of the transformed upper Tartarus. She needed to understand more about her own changes, about the limits of her abilities, about the true nature of the old ones. Tartarus Prime was her only source of guidance, but its communications were often cryptic, its perspective vast and geological. They call to you, as the deep calls to the deep. Tartarus Prime's whisper confirmed, a note of something that might have been resignation. Your attunement makes you a beacon to them, a potential nexus. A nexus for what? Lyra demanded. For their patterns to imprint upon this layer of the world, or for this layer to imprint upon them. Such an exchange is seldom balanced. The implication was horrifying. The old ones didn't just want to observe her. They wanted to use her, perhaps, as a bridge, a conduit through which their reality could more fully merge with, or overwrite, the current skin of the world. Over the next few cycles, the call from the core intensified. It manifested as vivid, waking dreams, visions of impossible geometries, of stars being born and dying in an instant, of consciousnesses so vast they encompassed galaxies. She saw the old ones themselves, not as physical forms, but as sentient, dynamic equations, as primal forces given temporary, shifting shape, beings of pure mathematics and unimaginable energy. And they were all looking at her, waiting. Her own body continued to change. The faint luminescence of her skin grew brighter in darkness. She found she needed less and less sleep, her mind constantly active, processing the influx of sensory data from her heightened awareness. She could feel the intricate flow of geothermal energy through the rock beneath her feet, the subtle shifts in the planet's magnetic field. She was becoming less human, more elemental, more like Tartarus Prime itself. One cycle, the call shifted. It was no longer a diffuse summons, but a specific, targeted pull towards a particular location deep within the newly exposed underlayers of Tartarus. A place where the severance line was thinnest, where the abyss itself seemed to be welling up. They have chosen a meeting place, Tartarus Prime informed her, its whisper heavy. To ignore the summons now would be perceived as a discordant act of extreme aggression. Their response would be unmaking. Lyra felt a cold dread. She was being forced into a confrontation, or at least an encounter, she was not prepared for. What do they want from me specifically? To understand the spark that can sing a countersong, to harmonize it with their own grand silence, or to silence it permanently. There was no choice. To refuse was to invite annihilation upon the fragile, recalibrated world. She had to go. She descended, following the insistent pull, through newly formed tunnels that twisted like the intestines of some colossal beast, deeper and deeper into the planet's wounded crust. The air grew thick, charged with exotic energies. The rock walls themselves hummed with power, glowing with veins of unknown pulsating minerals. The abyssal life forms were more numerous here, more complex, their alien forms parting before her as if recognizing her as something other, something significant. Finally, she reached a vast, spherical cavern, a geode of unimaginable size, its walls lined with colossal, perfectly formed crystals that pulsed with an internal, multi-hued light. This was the meeting place, and in the center of the cavern, floating in an area of distorted space-time where gravity itself seemed to bend, was it. It was not a single entity but a confluence, a shimmering, ever-changing vortex of light, shadow, and impossible geometry. It was a living equation, a sentient storm of primordial forces. This was a direct avatar, or perhaps a focused projection, of one of the old ones. Its voice filled the cavern, filled Lyra's mind, not as whispers but as a direct, overwhelming torrent of pure conceptual data. It was an invitation, an interrogation, a dissection all at once. Pattern singer, you have answered, your song is discordant, yet intriguing. Explain your resonance. Explain the silencing of the noisy child. Explain yourself. Lyra stood before the swirling vortex of the old one, a tiny, altered human spark against a backdrop of cosmic immensity. She had no weapons, no allies, only her own strange attunement and the chilling realization that the fate of her world might rest on her ability to sing a song that this ancient, alien god might, for a moment, deign to listen to. Chapter 19. The Song of a Fragile World. Before the swirling, kaleidoscopic avatar of the Old One, Lyra felt her human anxieties, her fears, her very sense of self begin to fray, to dissolve under the sheer, overwhelming pressure of its ancient, alien consciousness. It was like standing too close to a star, the raw power threatening to unmake her at a fundamental level. Speak, the conceptual torrent boomed in her mind, though speak was an inadequate translation for the complex demand it represented. It wanted her essence, her understanding, her unique vibratory signature laid bare. Lyra fought to hold onto her coherence. She couldn't match its power, its ancient complexity, but Tartarus Prime had said she was a key, that the old ones responded to fundamental frequencies, to patterns of resonance. She had sung a countersong to the crystalline spire. Perhaps she could sing a song for this fragile, recalibrated world. She closed her eyes, shutting out the terrifying, mesmerizing vortex. She reached inward, not to her fear, but to the core of what she was, what she had become. She focused on the spark, the resonance that Tartarus Prime and the Old One both perceived. She let her awareness expand, feeling the thrum of her own altered cells, the flow of energy through her body, the faint, protective echo of Tartarus Prime's vast consciousness intertwined with her own. Then she began to sing. Not with her voice. Her human vocal cords could not produce the sounds, the frequencies this required. She sang with her entire being, with the resonant energy she now commanded. She projected a pattern, a complex wave of thought, emotion, and pure vibratory energy. Her song was not one of defiance nor supplication. It was a song of existence. She wove into it the patterns of the surface world, the delicate dance of evolution, the intricate web of life, the fragility of ecosystem, the fleeting beauty of a sunrise over a mountain range, a memory poignant and sharp from a life that felt eons ago. She sang of the noisy children, their brief, chaotic spark of intelligence, their hubris, their capacity for both great destruction and surprising tenderness. She sang of Chiron Vale's dream of Eden, of sacrifice, of hope, however battered. She sang of the event Horizon Protocol, not as an act of aggression, but as a desperate surgery to save a dying patient. She sang of Tartarus Prime, its slow, ancient thoughts, its immense patience, its role as the skin, the protector of the fragile biosphere. She tried to convey the concept of balance, not as a static state, but as a dynamic, ongoing process, a delicate interplay of forces that allowed for the existence of complex, vulnerable life. The swirling vortex of the old one seemed to pause, its chaotic energies subtly shifting, its conceptual torrent quieting as it listened, or processed, or whatever its equivalent of perception might be. Lyra poured more of herself into the song. She felt the strain, the immense effort of projecting such a complex pattern against the old one's overwhelming presence. Her own internal light flickered, her strength waning. She wove in the discordance the counter-frequency she had used against the crystalline spire, not as an attack but as a demonstration. See, her song seemed to say, we, the life of the skin, can also shape patterns. We can also introduce novelty, change. We are not just passive threads to be rewoven at your whim. We are part of the song too, however faint our voices. A new series of concepts emanated from the old one, less demanding, more analytical. It was examining her song, deconstructing it, comparing its patterns to its own ancient, cosmic understanding. A fragile algorithm, improbably complex, born of shallow energies, yet it persists, it adapts, it sings. Lyra felt a faint shift in the old one's overwhelming presence. Not acceptance, not yet, but perhaps a flicker of something akin to respect, or at least a reevaluation. The curiosity was still there, but it was now tempered with a new layer of complexity. She was fatting. The effort was too great. Her song began to falter, her projected patterns losing coherence. Just as she felt herself slipping into unconsciousness, a new resonance joined hers. It was vast, cool, immensely powerful yet gentle, Tartarus Prime. The planetary consciousness, roused by her effort, by the old one's focused attention, was now adding its own voice to Lyra's song. Its song was different, deeper, slower. It sang of geological time, of continental drift, of the slow cooling of the planet's core, of the eons of silence and patient growth that had led to this current moment. It sang of its own role as a shield, a membrane between the fiery chaos of the core and the delicate life of the surface. It acknowledged the old ones as the first tenets, the heart kernels, but it also asserted its own domain, its own purpose, the nurturing of the thin skin of the world. Together, the two songs, Lyra's fragile, complex melody of surface life, and Tartarus Prime's deep, resonant bass line of planetary existence, intertwined, creating a new, richer harmony. A harmony that spoke of interconnectedness, of shared fate, of a balance that could, perhaps, encompass even the primordial old ones and the fleeting sparks of the surface. The avatar of the old one remained silent, its swirling form absorbing this combined song. The pressure of its consciousness lessened slightly. When Lyra finally collapsed, her energy utterly spent, the last thing she perceived was a final, lingering concept from the Old One, a thought that echoed in the collapsing chambers of her mind. The song is noted, the pattern will be considered. Then darkness. But this time it was not the darkness of oblivion, but the darkness of an exhausted, fragile world holding its breath, waiting for the judgment of its oldest, most powerful, and now, perhaps, slightly more contemplative gods. Chapter 20. The Unquiet Earth. Lyra awoke to the gentle, pulsing light of the giant crystals lining the geode cavern. The avatar of the Old One was gone. The overwhelming pressure of its consciousness had receded, leaving behind an echoing silence, a sense of immense, ancient forces having paused, withdrawn to consider. Tartarus Prime's presence was a comforting coolness around her, a supportive matrix. "You sang well, little spark. The first tenets have rarely been so directly addressed." Lyra felt weak, but a profound sense of calm pervaded her. She had faced the abyss, and somehow she and the fragile world she represented had survived the encounter. For now. What happens now? She projected faintly. They consider. Their thoughts span eons. Their decisions reshape realities. We wait. And while we wait, the skin of the world mends and adapts. She rose, her borrowed strength slowly returning. The journey back from the geode cavern was different. The abyssal life forms, the strange flora and fauna born of the Old One's stirring, were still present, but they seemed less aggressive, less chaotic in their expansion. Some even seemed to recoil slightly from her, as if sensing the lingering resonance of her encounter with their ultimate progenitor. The pruning she had done earlier, combined with the song, had subtly altered their patterns. Over the following cycles, Lyra became a wanderer in the transformed Tartarus. She was no longer just a survivor, nor merely a conduit. She was an active participant in the planet's recalibration, guided by Tartarus Prime, and by her own increasingly sophisticated attunement. She learned to subtly influence the new, wild energies of the facility. She could soothe the explosive crystalline flora, redirect the flow of exotic geothermal vents, even gently guide the less aggressive forms of abyssal life away from critical energy nexuses or areas where fragile, new surface-analogous ecosystems were attempting to take root. She was, as Tartarus Prime had said, a gardener, a tender of a world violently reborn. There were still horrors, pockets where the geode mine's influence lingered, corrupted data echoes that could animate rubble into shambling mockeries of life, fissures that belched forth truly monstrous, mindless entities from depths even the Old Ones seemed to ignore. And always, the subtle, patient, overwhelming awareness of the Old Ones themselves, their consideration, a palpable weight on the entire planet. One cycle, exploring a section of what had once been the uppermost administrative levels, now a bizarre landscape of twisted metal fused with newly formed crystalline structures. Lyra found something that sent a shock of purely human emotion through her. A databank, miraculously intact, though its casing was half melted and encrusted with glowing fungi. With trembling hands, she managed to activate its emergency power. The screen flickered to life, displaying corrupted OmniCorp files. But one folder was flagged, heavily encrypted. Project Outreach Final Transmission Logs. Project Outreach, a long-rumored, highly classified OmniCorp initiative to establish a permanent, self-sustaining colony on Mars, a desperate contingency plan in case of terrestrial catastrophe. Had they succeeded? Had anyone escaped Tartarus or Earth before the geode mine's full awakening, before the recalibration? The final transmission log was dated just prior to the initial catastrophic outbreak in Tartarus. It was a garbled, panicked message from the Mars colony, speaking of strange geological events, of anomalous energy readings from deep within the red planet, of whispers from the core. Lyra's blood ran cold. The old ones were not unique to Earth. They were, perhaps, a fundamental component of planetary formation, of cosmic existence. And humanity, in its relentless, desperate drive to expand, to survive, was blundering from one ancient slumbering ground to another. The patterns echo across the void. Tartarus Prime's whisper was somber, filled with an ancient weariness. The noisy children carry their chaotic song to other sleeping giants. Lyra looked at the message from Mars, then up at the torn, nebulous sky ceiling of Tartarus. Her world, her understanding, had just expanded and contracted in a terrifying new way. The fight for balance, the song of survival, was not just for this planet. It was a cosmic struggle, played out wherever life, in its fragile audacity, dared to take root in an ancient, unquiet universe. Her work as a gardener had just acquired a new, terrifying dimension. The seeds of horror were not confined to Tartarus. They were scattered among the stars, and the old ones on Earth and perhaps elsewhere were listening, waiting, considering. The unquiet Earth was but one small stage in a far grander, and infinitely more horrifying cosmic drama. And Lyra Chen, the resonant spark, the singer of a fragile world song, was now, whether she willed it or not, a player in that drama, her fate intertwined with the slow, ponderous decisions of beings who dreamt in eons and whose awakening could unmake galaxies. The silence from the core was not an ending. It was merely a pause before the next, unimaginable movement in the symphony of creation and oblivion. The end.